Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me on this episode 111. 111 episodes. I take a bit of pride in that number, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. Let's keep it moving. We have a damn good show for you today. A damn good show. In fact, a jam-packed show for you today. John Kiriakou is going to be here. John is a good friend of the show. The man is super affable, a former CIA spook, and he is now reformed and has effectively been telling things that take place within the context of the CIA. We have Dr. Warren Leon. He is going to be here. There is a fascinating question. And I think Nick Cruz from Revolutionary Blackout Network asked this question. I think it was him. I give him credit for it either way. Is there life beyond Bernie? Is there life beyond Bernie Sanders or the left? And if so, what is it? Now, the reason this question is being asked, not to, get into it early, but stuff like this. This is Bernie at his best, actually. All of these people are coming from Warren, I believe Texas. I want to say Texas, but it may not be Warren. Let's say Warren, wherever that is. This rally is so long that people are standing outside the door to get into the rally. Put that in context. Now, I look at that and say, wow, that's great. Bernie is still doing Bernie. In 4 years, what is Bernie Sanders going to tell these people to do? It's that. Sanders is going to channel all of this energy that he's able to generate over this time period. And he is going to tell those people to vote Democrat. And I find that to be problematic. And the question that I have, Sanders has been running out here as a warmonger, anything in opposition to Donald Trump and lumping in with the Democratic Party to do so. What is he going to do in 4 years? He's going to be far too old to run. And what he's going to say is vote Democrat. Just like he said, vote Kamala. Just like he said, vote Joe Biden. Just like he said, vote Hillary Clinton. None of these things have been to the betterment of us on the left. So there's that. One of the other interesting questions or people we're going to have Esteban Carrillo. He is going to be here talking about what is taking place in Syria. Syria is a black mark for all of these liberals, for all these people that effectively back people like Hillary Clinton, who had no good intentions at any point in her career, ever, especially at the point where she became a warmonger. And yes, I know the healthcare thing, fair enough. But I'm saying from the standpoint of foreign policy, Hillary Clinton has been a cancer on this earth. And, I don't know how many of you watch the originals. I love it. I love that show. I am stuck on that show. There's a part where the mom is trying to come back in order to get rid of her own family. And she points out, I've watched you for 1,000 years. And you have been a scourge on this planet, a curse inflicted upon the planet Earth in the form of flesh. That is Hillary Clinton. A curse inflicted upon this earth that has been given the form of flesh, a monster, a creature from the fucking swamp. That's who Clinton is. And she has gotten thousands upon thousands of people killed and are getting people slaughtered right now. For example, this awesome letter by WikiLeaks that points out policy that these guys were thinking and doing. There's also a letter from Jake Sullivan. Hillary Clinton email. Intelligence says collapse of Syria will spark Sunni Shiite war that will benefit Israel. Right now, they're going door to door, murdering women, children, and anybody that is not affiliated with their religious doctrine. It is outrageous. And yet, Clinton, perfectly fine with it. Perfectly fine with it. The United States and Russia apparently tried to push the UN Security Council to have a meeting over Syria because of how grotesque what has taken place is. We'll see if there are results from it. And of course, there's the United States and Ukraine meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. This is fascinating to me. This is utterly and entirely fascinating to me because I don't quite understand why this particular meeting is taking place. Also, when I was in Qatar, I bought my own dashiki. I would love to walk around in a nightgown in that way. And I know they're not nightgowns, but super comfortable. Are they wearing underwear under those nightgowns? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe Professor Wilmer Leon knows. My man, Professor Dr. Wilmer Leon is a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, host of Connecting the Dots on YouTube. You can check him out. How you doing this morning, my man? You doing all right?
My brother, I'm talking to you. I'm doing great. As my father would say, I'm gonna mess around and learn something.
Are you? Well, I guess both of us going to mess around and learn something because that was my point. Also, that's the entire point of me bringing you on. I'm glad you could join me, man. I really do. I always enjoy these conversations.
Well, and so do I. Thank you.
I really want to start with the Bernie Sanders thing. I may do a video putting a knife in Sanders, but he was part of my political awakening. And because he always has a special spot in me. Mm-hmm. I also think ultimately he means well. So I want to put that out to him. Meaning, I don't think Sanders is a negative actor in a way that I think some other people are. Mm-hmm. I just think what he does is unhelpful in this case. So, for example, this line is around the block. Sanders. They want to hear him talk. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of people are piling into a small location in order to see Bernie Sanders talk. And apparently the line is so long, it'll take 10 minutes to get to the location. I remember being in Temple, Pennsylvania to watch Bernie Sanders talk for the first time. Mm-hmm. It was a religious experience. The only thing I could really balance it with is when I was in the Vatican watching the Pope and having all of these people in perfect unison staring at a little window at the little man saying something in Italian that I had no idea what he was saying. Mm. But there is a feeling about it that is very difficult for me to describe. Not a Christian, still felt that way. I felt that way at the Sanders rally, where all these people are in unison. Healthcare, education, expansion of Social Security. We're on the same page. We're going to change the world. That was our mindset. And then Sanders runs, I don't want to say a half-assed campaign, but a campaign where it seemed like he didn't believe he could win himself. That he just wanted to push Clinton. And at some point realized, oh, right, I have a chance to win this. But at that point, it was effectively too late. Not to mention they screwed the guy out of the race. He turns around and says, vote Clinton. He runs against Joe Biden, turns around, vote Joe Biden. Sanders had tens of millions of people that were willing to bleed on the flag for him, to crawl over hot glass to vote for Bernie Sanders. And all of that energy, it turns around and gets channeled into a Democratic Party that cheated him. This crowd, in 3 years, Sanders is going to say, vote whatever random Democrat that they put up. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that's a problem that needs to stop. Is there a left beyond Bernie Sanders? And if so, what is it?
Wow, that's a great question. I love the way you just set this up. I don't think there's an organized left beyond Bernie Sanders. And there's hardly an organized left, period. And you echoed to a great degree my sentiments as it relates to Bernie Sanders. I remember watching him on a town hall in West Virginia. This was probably 2016. And he was so profound. he was so powerful in in his clarity, and he was right. They were talking about the fentanyl crisis and the prescription drug crisis in West Virginia. And he had those folks eaten out of his hand. And a guy stood up and said, he said, I never thought I would have seen the day when I would be sitting here listening to a Yankee from the North and willing to vote for him. That's how profound he was. I've also come to believe that this duopoly, this two-party system, is so powerful that it takes an incredibly powerful mindset to buck the system, especially if you've come out of or are in the system.
Right.
To your point, I don't think he's duplicitous. I don't think there's any ill intent or that he's trying to mislead anybody. I think he honestly believes in what he's doing.
Yes.
And then I also think that he's afraid of being blamed for a catastrophic loss by the Democratic Party. And I think that mindset was also prevalent in Dr. West.
But they've already had a catastrophic loss.
Hey, man. Yeah, but they didn't get blamed for it.
I guess my point is it's like, dude, you're if you were trying to save the world, like meaning if that is your mindset, I'm going to save the world, because that's what all of those people thought who was at that rally. That is what they got. We are here for political revolution. Okay, well, what does that mean? This is a change. This is something that is fundamental change. All of those people agreed. How can you run a race under that mindset of I'm here to change the world, but I'm terrified of being blamed? It's a risk. You have to accept the risk. And they already lost to Trump twice.
Hey, I've never played the game at that level. I've only been an analyst. I'm only a political scientist. I haven't been out there taking them shots like that. I don't know the answer to that question. But I agree with you. You play silly games, you win silly prizes. So we're talking about Bernie Sanders, but I'll throw Dr. West into this conversation as well.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and he's a very dear friend of mine. I couldn't understand, and I had these conversations with him. I couldn't understand how you tell the country you're running for president, and then you try to run the campaign on your terms. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
The process isn't set up for that. And when they came after Dr. West on the child support and the other financial issues, the validity or invalidity of that is not relevant to this conversation. How could you not anticipate those shots?
Right.
So, staying in the Green Party, in my humble opinion, was the lockdown, cold-blooded move. That's where you should have stayed. That's where the apparatus was. That's where the money was. That's where that's where access to the ballot was. But he was advised. And see, you also have to, you can't only look at the candidate, you also have to look at the advisors.
Mm-hmm.
He was advised to go another direction. That wasn't the direction I would have advised him to go. but he decided to go another direction. Bernie has become the bell cow for the Democrats.
Yes. And that is very frustrating to me.
It's
Because
yeah.
to me, if I have, and again, I haven't played the level, fair enough. I'm just an analyst, a humble analyst, right? I don't even have a doctor in front of my name. So there's that. But I do play chess, and I'm damn good at it.
Uh-huh.
And in a political space, if you have 20, 30 million people, that is power.
Right.
Even if it's not enough to win, that is power. That is enough. I have enough to make you lose.
Right.
Which means I can destroy it all. That is a power. It may not necessarily be a power that people necessarily like to employ, but damn it, I'm willing to employ it if I need to. And if you have that many people and you are going into some kind of political negotiation, you have chips. I guess I'm saying, for one, I wish you would have went after her throat and Joe Biden's throat, like the world depended on it, in the way that he articulated the world depended on it. Like, how are you telling me this is so radically important that we need a political revolution, but I'm going to, dance around the fact that Joe Biden is out of his mind, that he's old, and that his policies suck? Like, it's like, that is so frustrating to me. It's almost like it is difficult to get a good man in politics for various reasons. Some of those things is that guy is not going to want to do the things necessary in order to win. That's how I feel about Sanders. And I guess my thing is, there has to be something beyond that. There has to be, and I know you're going to hate this word, a Trumpian left that still has a moral component, but is willing to put a knife in his opposition and not care in the way that Trump just doesn't seem to care. I'm going to end the war. What about the tax? I don't care about the tax. I'm going to end the war. People told me to end the war. That's what I'm going to do. We don't have that. And then I know they always compare Trump to Sanders just because of the populist element. But Sanders is not that guy where he is willing to just win, regardless of what happens. Win. Whatever the risk, win. That's not him. There has to be something beyond that. I don't know what that something is.
2 examples. The first example I'll use is Reverend Jackson.
Jesse Jackson.
And when he ran in 88, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Before Clinton.
A lot of people don't appreciate the power of the Jackson campaign. You would not have Barack Obama if it hadn't been Jesse Jackson, and I go back to the advisors and my mentor, Dr. Ronald Walters. As the Democrats were trying to get Reverend Jackson out of the campaign, he negotiated the primary condition for his leaving the campaign was proportional distribution of delegates. You will do away with the winner-take-all system, and you will assign delegates proportionally. That's what enabled Barack Obama to stay in the race long enough to gain traction in the 90, whatever year it was he ran.
Yep.
That's wielding power. And what the Democrats also did was they absorbed a lot of Reverend Jackson's people into the party apparatus, to a great degree, diluting a lot of the power going forward. But my point is, he got out of the race and he got something for it that was tangible, and we saw its benefit in the election of Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Compare and contrast that to Hakeem Jeffries.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
He's the minority leader. But the problem is the Democrats are operating as the minority party instead of operating as the opposition. And so all they do is capitulate and go along to get along.
Mm-hmm.
And I think That is because the mindset of the party has changed.
What does that mean? Explain that. Look, I agree with you. Give me a take on it, though. What do you mean when you say the mindset of the party has changed?
Well, they're no longer and I'm making these, I'm using these references in terms of stereotypically. I know that from a policy perspective, this wasn't always the case, but the perception of the Democrats was they were the party of the working class. They
Right.
were the party that advocated for the poor. They were the anti-war party. They were the party of the average citizen. And again, we can look at the Voting Rights Act. We can look at the
Mhm.
Civil Rights Act. We can look at the Fair Housing Act. We can look at the Fair Employment Act. All of these things came from uh, public unrest, civil unrest, appeals to a Democratic president who got this legislation through. They are now the party of war. And they are the party of, for all intents and purposes, they're the party of capitulation. They're not as much opposed to the policy of the Republicans. They're opposed to the operational aspects of it. So they argue around the edges. They argue around the fringes. Because Hakeem Jeffries is not going to stand at the podium and say, no, we're not doing it this way. We're not having this. You're not. I mean, he's saying that right now as it relates to Friday and the
Right.
and the looming shutdown. I think I heard him yesterday. The Democrats are not, yeah, okay. Well, let's see where we are on Saturday. You know, if you're still holding this ground on Saturday, then I'm wrong. And I will gladly admit I'm wrong. But something tells me, based upon your history, Hakeem Jeffries, that you're going to fold like bad origami. Because you always do. Well, you see, we couldn't have the public. Oh, you see, man, I thought you said you were going to stand your ground. So it's hard. I don't say this to make excuses for getting back to Bernie Sanders. All of that to say, I think he's scared.
I agree.
I think he's scared.
I do agree with you. I mean, he said it himself that I don't want to be the next Ralph Nader. Chris Hedges said he had a conversation with Bernie Sanders, and Sanders said something to the effect of, I don't want to be Ralph Nader. And Ralph Nader is the one who they blamed for the
Right.
law. I forget the candidate who was running. It might have been
And what
Bush.
did I say 5 minutes ago? He doesn't want to be blamed as Dr. West, I believe. He didn't say this to me. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
He did not want to be blamed for being the spoiler. And what did Kamala Harris say during the 16 campaign? I think it was 16, first time. Yeah, the 16 campaign during the first debate. I'm not here for substantive change. I remember her saying that very clearly. I'm not here for substantive change. It takes you are putting a target on your back, literally and figuratively. If you step out on that stage and tell them we're going to burn this rascal down. It takes a Dr. King. It takes a Malcolm. It takes a Fannie Lou Hamer to sit there at the table and say, hey, I got the match and the Molotov, and we about to burn this rascal down.
Or it takes somebody who just says that they don't care. Or it takes somebody who leans on this idea of this is necessary to move in that direction. Like me, I guess my thing is there's a contradiction in what he says versus what he does.
Absolutely. Because
We
at
are
the end
here
of the
for
day, he
political.
capitulates.
Yeah. And I'm saying, don't tell me that you want a political revolution. Like, this is going to change. This needs to change.
Right.
And then sheepishly go in a campaign. Those things don't work together. Like, you are getting people fired up. And then it's like, now I need you to go vote Democrat.
Right.
Joe Biden is the next FDR.
Look,
It's like, okay, dude.
from South Carolina?
You mean Clapper?
Clyburn. You know, you've got this whole crew. How many members in the Black Caucus? 43, 44?
Something like that. Yeah.
Only 2 or 3 of them are worth anything. Only 2 or 3. And I mean that 2 or 3.
Yeah.
They were, their moniker was the conscience of the Congress. Now they're unconscious. I wrote a piece to that effect. Al Green from Texas. The sister from Detroit, the Palestinian sister from Detroit.
Oh, Rashida
Tlaib, and Ilana
Presley.
Yeah, well, no. There's another sister from Texas who Crockett.
The nasty mouth one.
Crockett and the sister from Minnesota. That's 5. I'm hard pressed to find number 6. I'm hard pressed to find number 6.
I got to be honest, Crockett has been in somewhat of an embarrassment from my point of view. And let's get the person wrong. That was the one that was doing a nasty mouth video, like she was coming out of a club. I don't know if you've seen the video.
I haven't seen the video.
So the Democrats had decided that they wanted to do, I guess, promos. And one of the promos that they were doing was like in an anime game where they were pretending like they were ready to fight. And people watched and it's like, what the hell are you doing?
I didn't see that.
Okay, so Crockett does her own video where she is like dancing as if she's coming out of a club. And she's doing the nasty mouth thing with that. And it's like, okay, what is this?
Okay.
Like this is not what people want. What people want is very straightforward.
Right.
They just want you to do your job. They want policy. They want substance. They want to believe that you believe in something.
Okay, so now we got 4.5.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I don't know, man. It's just disappointing. That's all. And I don't know what it looks like. Like I don't know.
But you've got 40. You got 44 of these people, or 43. That's power in Congress. If you've got a block of 40, you got a block.
Mm-hmm.
When was the last time you saw them on C-SPAN standing in unison saying, here's what we are demanding?
Oh, but they don't see themselves. It's like, I know what you mean, but it's not like, I don't think they see themselves in the context of Black as a block, if that makes sense. I know they call themselves that, but that's not the way they work politically. Unless I'm wrong.
No, you're right. That's my point. Go back and read if you, and I'm not saying this to you, I'm saying this to your audience. Folks, go read Ossie Davis's speech. He was the keynote speaker at the first Congressional Black Caucus dinner in 1972. I can't remember the title. It might be, it's not the, I know the point of the speech was, it's not the man, it's the plan. I'm not sure if that was the title of the speech,
But that was the
But
context. Yeah.
but he was telling the caucus, it is your responsibility to lay out a plan for Black America. And he ends the speech by saying, if disaster should befall us, after the dust settles, and I'm paraphrasing, after the dust settles, when that one brother crawls out from the rubble, from the cave, he should be able to turn to the brother next to him and say, hey, man, what's the plan?
Yeah.
That was his direction to them, their first CBC dinner.
That's not the way they function now. That's not the way they function.
No,
Like, because
because
it
they
sounds like,
dysfunction. They don't function, they dysfunction.
yeah, yeah, they don't work as a political bloc
Mm-mm.
like that.
Anyway,
I want to get to Mahmoud Khalil before
yes.
we
Mhm.
think. You know, JD Vance went to Europe and browbeat the Europeans for the nonsense that the Europeans are doing. He is right in that speech because
Mhm.
Europe is locking people up for tweets. They are raiding people's houses for tweets or social media commentary that for an American audience is just part of the course. You know, somebody says bad things about you. Okay, they said bad things about me. I'm moving on with my life, right? Social media, I don't consider it to be real. But that's not the way Europe is functioning. And to make it even worse, if you're talking about like elections, the overthrowing of the Romanian election, Carl Quercescu, that is just outrageous.
Mhm.
The things that they were saying about the German election, saying if the wrong person wins in that election, we have the tools, just like we did in Romania, in order to change that election. You get the protests or the, let's say, the pressure put against Georgia's government. Like, this is stuff that Europe is doing that for them has become somewhat of a normal way of operation. Okay, it's outrageous. But then when you get back to the US, their prize pony, Israel, gets criticized for committing a genocide, and the administration gets criticized for attempting to ethnically cleanse that area. They go on a spree of putting pressure on campuses, trying
Mhm.
to pull money from those campuses, like effectively doing everything in their power at the White House to screw over people that are protesting Israel.
Mhm.
One of the people in this, Mahmoud Khalil, Columbia student or ex-Columbia student, that ICE tried to deport. He was here legally. He had permission to be here.
Mhm.
They kicked him out of school.
No, he
And
graduated.
oh, he did graduate. Good. Okay.
He graduated.
Okay.
They
Okay.
took him out of student housing, but he had graduated.
Okay. So they took. Thank you for that. They took him
Mhm.
out of student housing. ICE arrested him and tried to deport him. Apparently, a federal judge blocked the deportation. But the fact that you're trying to deport the guy because you don't like what the guy is saying is outrageous,
Well,
especially
no.
after that speech.
They're still trying to deport him.
Outrageous.
He is right now being held in detention in Louisiana. They sent him from New York to a facility in New Jersey. And then from the ICE facility in New Jersey, he now is sitting in detention in Louisiana.
It's outrageous.
And I believe the reason that he's in Louisiana is, I think, this is my opinion, I think because they're trying to venue shop. And they figure that that eventually the case will fall upon more sympathetic ears if he's in the South than if he's in the New York. I think that's the 9th district in
Yeah.
New York. So a judge, I think in New York, has suspended the deportation. Wants to have a hearing. So I think tomorrow that they're supposed to have a hearing, and his counsel is requesting that he be returned to New York.
Yes.
But it all centers around free speech. There is a very obscure State Department policy, I think it's a policy, that gives the Secretary of State the ability to remove aliens that the Secretary of State determines are jeopardizing American foreign policy. This is what I believe the Trump administration is basing its position on. It's that his support for Palestine is a threat to American policy as the United States supports the Zionist settler colonial colony known as Israel. And based upon what Trump is saying, you and I could be arrested for having this conversation.
It got us fired. This is the same logic that got us fired, by the way.
Yeah.
When the Biden administration comes
Right.
out, and I remember I was on a flight to Malaysia, I believe, and I'm sitting in the airport and I'm looking at CNN, and Blinken comes out and says, we're putting sanctions on the parent companies. And even went further in saying, we believe that this has been a problem to our ability for foreign policy, saying that, the reason that countries in Africa and some of the global South hasn't lumped on to the Ukraine war is because of RT and Sputnik and the things that they have been saying around the globe. And I'm sitting there like, okay, what the hell does this mean for my job? I had no idea, right? But that's the same logic. This logic that Trump comes in and says, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. They've been going after people, and because they didn't necessarily like the things that they were saying on social media, et cetera, that is no more the process. And then they pull this nonsense where it's so weak. Like, it exudes weakness. It doesn't exude strength.
Oh, no question.
But the strength is, you have a point of view. We have an American democracy. We have a First Amendment. God bless, give your point of view. It's that this is insecure. It demonstrates that, A, you're in the bag for Zionist settler colonial state, because otherwise the First Amendment will most likely apply. You're not telling me that this guy, one guy, and his point of view is a threat to U.S. foreign policy, as it gives 80-90% of Israel's ability to pursue a genocide. Like, this is outrageous. It puts you in the mind of George Bush saying this is enhanced interrogation. It's using language in order to get around the intent of a particular law. And it's unfortunate, because I think you're right. They're probably looking around for a judge that would effectively deport the guy.
What it demonstrates very clearly is the weakness in their position. Israel does not tolerate, the Zionist colony does not tolerate any level of dissension. Zero. That's why they're trying to equate support for Palestinians as being anti-Semitic.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with that is all a fiction. That is a fraud. That is a lie. That is a contrived position created in order to support a lie. But that's all they have. And to show you the power of what we were doing at Sputnik, I have a buddy in Mozambique that was in a meeting with Mozambicans. I think that's what they're called. And they were going at it hard.
Yeah.
And my buddy is a guy who, he has this incredible ability to de-escalate. So he's listening to this guy from Mozambique coming at him hard from the other end of the table, and he says to the guy, he says, you know what? I got somebody you need to listen to. And the guy says, is he an American? And my boy says, and as a matter of fact, he is. He says, but he articulates a lot of the same policies that you're articulating. Well, why would I want to listen to an American? And so my buddy says, no, you need to read some of this guy's stuff. He says, well, who is your friend? And he says, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And the guy goes, you know him? And my boy goes, no, you know him? And he says, I listen to him every day. He says, I listen to Sputnik every day. And I don't say that to feather my own nest. I say that I was, as you were, a part of a very, very powerful. How many times have you been out in the last 4 months and someone has come to you and said, man, since your show went off, my day is ruined. I used to center my day around listening to your show. You know, I was in New York a couple of weeks ago with Richard Wolff, and I had 5 people come to me and tell me, man, I'm kind of lost now because you and Garland, you know, my day from 2 to 4 was you and Garland, and now you guys, you know, so, but here's the thing. You were and are telling the truth. That's the point. Very long way to make the point. We were and are telling the truth.
It's frustrating. That sucks. And I feel bad for that guy. Because, you know, it's American. First Amendment is American as apple pie. At the very least it should be. At the very least it was. And it is not a good look.
Because the First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason.
Yes.
They didn't get a Yahtzee cup and roll out some dice and just randomly decide that free speech and the exercise of religion and the freedom to assemble, they didn't just randomly decide. Every comma, every semicolon, every capital letter in that document is there for a reason.
Yeah.
There is nothing arbitrary about the Constitution. We can debate its validity. We can debate a whole lot of stuff about the document. But every single comma, that's why the Second Amendment should no longer even be in the Constitution, because there are commas, not semicolons. Those are dependent clauses, not independent clauses. And if you know anything about English grammar and sentence structure, you cannot debate that point.
You will know that there are a lot of lefties that will greatly disagree with you on that.
Look, man, a semicolon is there for a reason.
No, I mean the Second Amendment thing.
No,
I've met lefties who are firm defenders because in their mind,
they're wrong because you argue with the comma. Don't argue with me. Argue with sentence structure.
There are plenty of lefties that firmly believe in the right to bear arms because they don't trust the government.
Wait a minute. I'm not saying we don't have the right to bear arms. What I'm saying is it's not guaranteed in the Second Amendment. That's not what the Second Amendment says.
Agrees. 1,000% agree with you on that.
It doesn't. I had this argument with Wayne LaPierre in the green room at CNN and his attorney.
Did you?
Yes.
Interesting. Because look, you're absolutely right. Give me your argument on that. But I do believe you're right because it doesn't say you can walk around with a grenade launcher, right? It's talking about very specific. You can join a militia, but these aren't militias.
And we now have a National Guard. We don't have militias anymore because we don't need militias anymore because we have the National Guard. The right of a people, comma, in defense of the nation, comma, not semicolon. These are dependent clauses. Don't argue with me.
Right.
Argue with Stephen Crutchfield, who taught me English when I was in high school. Don't argue with me. Call Mr. Crutchfield and let him. I'm sorry, Crutcher. Let Mr. Crutcher argue with Mr. Crutcher. He's the one that literally hit me in the head with the English book when I went to a Catholic high school. He hit me in the head with the English book when I was in high school. Dog,
Yeah, don't argue. Yeah,
don't argue with me. Argue with him.
Look, you're absolutely right. For whatever reason, the Supreme Court doesn't interpret it that way. But you're absolutely right.
So my whole point. The First Amendment is the First Amendment because it's the most important amendment. That was my point.
Yes, everything else depends upon the ability to speak, and the ability to
petition the government for your
exactly for grievances. Dr. Wimberly, man, I always appreciate having you on here. Dr. Wimberly is a political scientist, nationally syndicated columnist, and host of Connecting the Dots. Dr. Wimmer, where can people find you on your show?
WilmerLeon.com. And today I have on Connecting the Dots on YouTube from 3 to 4 Eastern. Robert Fantina is joining me today.
He's a great guest.
Robert Fantina is joining me today. And Ajamu Baraka joins me tomorrow on and Saturday on my XM show, Congressman Al Green.
Are you serious?
Al Green joins me from Congressman Al Green joins me from 12 to 1 Eastern on Sirius XM 126 on Saturday.
That's a hell of a guess. Dr. Wimberly, thank you, my man. I appreciate it.
As always. Appreciate it.
Have a good one. Be safe. Always appreciate talking to Dr. Wimberly. He is getting Al Green. I always joke, I always call him Wolfman because he's like Wolfman. But still, great guess. Always appreciate talking to Dr. Wimberly. Always learn something when we speak. He is going to class, so he has to leave a little bit early, but fair enough. I accept the time that he gives me. Coming up at 8 o'clock, we're going to have Daniel Lazar, because what is taking place in Romania right now is rather astonishing. They have effectively banned Carl Gogetscu from running in the race in Romania, a race that he should have already won, and he should already be installed as leader of that country. But instead, if you remember, to give a little bit of context, he was running in the race in Romania. He was a dark horse candidate. He came out the blue. He was one of those people that at the very least said, I don't want a military base in Romania. I am not trying to be a second front or, this other pivot point to go after the Russians. That is not what I want. That is not what I'm about. He wins the first round. This shocked the political space in Romania. They run in the second round. He is leading in the second round. A court comes out and annuls the election, and they said they were TikTok ads. And we believe that the Russians were controlling those TikTok ads to put Gogetscu in the position that he was in. I call BS on this the very day this came out. I call BS on this is because I'm old, and my age gives me a context of reality based upon the things that I've already seen in this life. And yes, they may bias me in a particular way, but I would wager that that bias is a right bias, if that makes sense. I said, this is nonsense. We did this in America. Facebook and Twitter ads put out by the Russians, supposedly, that overturned an election where Hillary Clinton spent over $1 billion. And they said those Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which took place after the election, for $50,000, overturned a presidential election. Outrageous. It's ridiculous on its face. And yet, they had an investigation after investigation, even to the point of trying to throw Donald Trump out in a soft coup. So the fact that I've seen this with my own eyes in my own country, I look at them and say, this is nonsense. Nonsense. Come to find out, my bias was right. It was a liberal group that had put money into these ads. Nothing to do with the Russians, nothing of the such. They killed an election for something premised on a lie and premised on something that didn't happen. Did they restart the election? Of course not. Of course not. Kiriakou was arrested at one point. I think this was last week. Detained, and eventually it comes out you're not allowed to run. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And by the way, I don't care. That's not entirely true. I'm sick of this pivot to war that Europe is taking. So, yeah, I have a feeling about this. It is outrageous that Europe is doing this. And the European Union has nothing to say about it at all. My guest has a lot to say about it, though, which is the reason why I brought him on. He is the man himself, Daniel Lazar. He's an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, and government and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, man, thank you for this. It was short notice, so I really appreciate you joining me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Go into what is happening in Romania. I am stunned by this because, look, I could be naive, but usually when I look at Europe, I think orderly, democratic governments. And I mean democratic in the larger sense. You know, it could be a parliamentary, it could be a republic, whatever. This is not that. This is something different. They killed the election the first time around that he was running under this notion of TikTok ads that ended up being put out by a liberal party, not the Russians, in the way that they said. He won the first round. He was on pace to win the second round. They annulled the election. Another election was apparently supposed to be called. He gets detained by the cops. I'm saying roughed up, but in a sense of effect, threat. I consider locking a candidate up a clear indication that your government doesn't like you all that much. And eventually he is barred from running in the next election that he is slated to win. How are they doing this? Like, what are they using as a premise in order to prevent him from running in the next election?
Romania has emerged as a country of great strategic value. It's on the west coast of the Black Sea. It's much more reliable than Turkey, for example, and of course, it's not embattled the way the Ukraine is, which is also
right.
NATO is building what will eventually be the biggest military base in all of Europe, even bigger than Ramstein in Germany. It'll be a home for 10,000 troops. They're building in a town called Constanta on the Black Sea coast, about 350 miles or so southwest of Odessa. It'll give NATO a commanding position over the entire Black Sea, and it'll bring Central Asia within striking range of NATO air forces. So this is a huge investment. It's a huge investment in Romania as a strategic asset, and it's very, very important. And therefore, Georgescu has stumbled into a hornet's nest because he is an anti-war skeptic. He's a far rightist, no doubt about it. He's an anti-war skeptic who is smart enough to realize the Ukraine is losing, that the last thing that Romania wants is to be dragged into that morass. So he's therefore saying no. And everyone is going bonkers as a result. And they are taking steps to essentially delegitimize him as a presidential candidate. There's the Al Jazeera referred to it as a constitutional crisis, not only for Romania but for the entire EU, and I think that's good. That's a very apt description, because essentially, as you said before, Europe consists of these democratic, well-governed states, but they're all part of NATO, and therefore they're democratic under a NATO aegis. But that framework is breaking down due to the war in the Ukraine, which, as I'm sure you agree, was completely unnecessary.
Yeah,
But the U.S. Stumbled into it regardless, beginning in 2013, 2014, and so therefore that NATO democratic framework is falling apart. So they want to ban this guy Calin Georgescu from running for president. And the reason they want to do that is they think he might win.
Yeah, he would win.
And if he wins, then therefore those military plans are in serious jeopardy. And the paradox for the Romanians is that more they adopt these heavy-handed tactics, the better he will do. It's like a Democrats in lawfare. I mean, all these BS prosecutions that they used to try to bring down Trump only made him stronger. So they face the same problem in Romania, where everything they do to solve the problem merely makes the problem worse. That's it.
They've stopped him from, correct me if I'm wrong, they've barred him from running in that race.
Yes, and some constitutional court. I mean, what does that even mean, a constitutional court? And for reasons they have not yet disclosed. But what appears to be is he appears to be friendly with the Russians. What is he taking money from the Russians? I don't know, very possibly. But are other candidates taking money from the Americans, the Brits, or the French? Absolutely. So you're allowed to draw from some foreign sources, but you're not allowed to draw from other foreign sources because that's what NATO stands for.
This breaks any model of a democratic republic. Like, meaning your government, the entire point is that the public can decide we don't want this. That's their right. That's the entire point. Because otherwise, it's something else. It's not a democracy. It's not a republic. It's something else. If the public can't say, maybe we don't want a base. Maybe we don't want to be part of NATO. Maybe we don't like the way this is operating. And if you have some other structure saying you don't get to make that choice, then you can't call it a democracy. You can't call it a republic. You can't call it any of those things. It's something else. I just find it to be outrageous. And then the European Union has nothing to say about it. Like, they don't complain. They don't say, hey, that doesn't look very democratic. They don't say anything. Vance went to Europe and browbeat them and brought up Romania specifically saying, how on earth are you doing that to one of your own countries? And Europe had nothing to say about it.
Of course, Vance is not one to talk because democracy is falling apart just as dramatically.
I agree with you.
In the United States. So,
I'm just pointing out. Then he at least pointed out, right? It's like your house is on fire. You say, hey, your house is on fire. No. It doesn't make it wrong.
I mean, all these structures are crumbling. NATO, first and foremost. I mean, NATO is going the way of the Warsaw Pact in 89 to 91. It's just falling apart. It has no reason. It has no reason to exist, really, it's clashing with the democratic aspirations of the people, under it. So the whole structure is crumbling, but the U.S. is too. I mean, democracy is under intense strain. It's in crisis. We are entering into an extraordinary period.
In the old days, and I want to get your take on this because I think this is somewhat controversial. In the old days, the governments of, let's say, Europe and the United States were looked at as, look at these democracies. They function well. They have better economies. They have more open economies. They have free speech. They have all of these things. And you can say, well, look at the Soviet Union, and you have this repressive government that is in so much shambles in the way that it operates. And you could look at the world at that point and say, well, democracies, this is the end of history. These are the things that work. These are the structures that people create that actually move people forward. I can't say that today.
Yeah.
Like, if you're looking at Russia, China, they seem to be far more competent and far more, let's say, long thinking in the way that they operate. And maybe that's the position of the underdog. If you and I are playing chess and I am in a weaker position, I have to be more vigilant Or otherwise I'm going to lose that much faster. It could be that. I don't know. But if you look at America, it's not a picture of success. These guys can't even pass a budget. I don't know the last time they passed a budget. Something very basic. 36 trillion in debt, and the number is only going to go up. And there's nothing that anybody's going to do anything about it anytime soon. Trump and whatever savings he's going to get, they're going to put it in the tax cuts, which is going to blow the budget up that much more. Like, I don't get the sense of competence in either Europe or in America in regards to the way we run our countries. Whereas it seems that other governments do it better and are more repressive than what we would consider, let's say, normal for our space. Give me your take on that. I mean, that doesn't make me feel good to say, but it seems to be true.
Oh no, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the Chinese economy is slowing down, but it's double the U.S. Rate of growth. So there's no doubt. I mean, there's a guy named Ezra Klein, who's a New York Times opinion writer, had a piece where he pointed out on this over the weekend. He pointed out that California has spent something like $77 billion. It's not been spent, but it's been planned for a high-speed rail corridor that is going absolutely nowhere. It's been stalled for the last 12 years. And in that time, China has built 23,000 miles of high-speed rail line.
That is my point.
Yeah,
that is precisely my point.
Exactly. So the U.S. can't get 1 mile built, and the Chinese get 23,000 miles built. And rail lines are really good. They're not always good, but what the U.S. desperately needs is a revitalized rail system, because wherever you go, you see nothing but traffic and sprawl. It's horribly wasteful. It's not productive. It's very damaging. It causes all kinds of problems, but the U.S. is simply incapable of addressing this problem in a coherent way. So listen. So I've written 3 books on this subject. The U.S. Constitution dates from 1787. That makes it 238 years old at this point. It's essentially unchangeable. It hasn't worked in a generation. In other words, there's been nothing but gridlock, poisonous gridlock on Capitol Hill. It's grossly racist and biased towards minorities. The U.S. Senate, as you know, is based on equal state representation. So therefore, Wyoming, which I think is 92% white, last I checked, gets the same number of votes as California, which is a minority-majority state and 68 times as populous. 10% of the country lives in 10 states. I'm sorry. A majority, 54% of the country, lives in just 10 states that are outvoted 4-1 by the minority in the other 40. The Electoral College more than triples the weight of Wyoming vis-a-vis California, and the Supreme Court, which is a joint product of the Senate and the House and the White House. Of the 6 conservatives, 5 were either appointed by minority presidents, i.e., either Donald Trump or W, or were ratified, confirmed by senators representing a minority of the population. So the Supreme Court is a minoritarian institution. So it's a minority dictatorship. But yet it's unchangeable. This is the essential point. I mean, America is locked into an 18th century constitution dating from the days of silk knee breeches and slavery. And it can't be changed because the ratification process is broken. It also allows tiny minorities to veto any constitutional change. So the country's falling apart. It's painted itself into a corner. It's so proud of this Constitution, yet this Constitution is killing it, and there is no way of changing it, of democratizing it. So that's the story. And the U.S. is the global hegemon. So essentially, in a sense, the U.S. Constitution is the world constitution, and everybody is suffering under the weight of these undemocratic governments. The EU. I mean, no one elected Ursula von der Leyen.
No, they did not.
She rose somehow through some kind of
Bureaucratic
indirect process, but she represents no one. I mean, these structures completely tower over the ordinary person. So why should they give them their loyalty? And why should they give NATO their loyalty? Because NATO is equally as unrepresentative. So the structure, it lacks a mandate. It lacks democratic legitimacy. So it's falling apart. That is the source of the democratic crisis that is now underway.
Is it that the document is problematic? And look, you're probably right that the document is problematic in some points. Or is it that the document has been in effect so long that people have found ways to, let's say, perfect corruption, perfect ways of basically, because I don't know if it's entirely the document or if it's entirely the people. Because the country at some point worked. And yeah, you're right, slave country, all of that stuff is true. But it functioned in a way that seemed to be more competent than it does now. And I can't tell if it's because when you attend to a process for a very long time, they get better at corruption. Okay, we know how to weasel our way into this document. We know how to add in legislative things to make our life easier and to get advantage. Or is it the further you get away from, let's say, a revolution, the less they believe in the revolution? Meaning, yes, you broke away from the Brits. Congratulations. That is fantastic. And initially, at the very beginning, you believe it. We believe in this. This is something we believe in. We invest our strength into it. We're going to defend this democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And then 300 years later, that stuff doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't sink into you in the way it might have sunk into the people who were there at the very beginning, in which case you lost the mission. You've lost this thread that goes all the way back to the beginning where the revolution first took place. Meaning, is it that? Like, is it a disconnect? I hope that makes sense. Is it a disconnect from the beliefs and the values that were initially instilled when they first started? Or is it this notion that they've just got better at corruption? As opposed to the document in and of itself. I mean, I guess my thing is, wouldn't that be true for any document that's 300 years old where people lose the thread? And this can be the last question. I'm always fascinated by this because I think you're right, but I think there's more to it, if that makes sense. I feel weird saying that because you've written 3 books on it. Give me a take on that, though, and this can be the last question.
Well, first of all, everything you said is correct, and there is more to it. It's not just the document. There is more to it, but the document is a very important part of the story. I mean, when Tyrannosaurus Rex came along, I mean, it was great. He was the biggest, toughest species ever to walk the earth. And he was fantastically successful. And I don't want to be sexist because the female Tyrannosaurus Rexes were successful also. But eventually the species dies. Things change. Its asset, what was formerly a strength, becomes a weakness, etc. In the lives of nations, 250 or 300 years is kind of a normal lifespan. The U.S. had its growth, its takeoff period, which was quite spectacular. By 1848, California had been admitted as a state. So what had been 60 or 70 years earlier, a straggling bunch of colonies along the Atlantic seaboard with 4 million people, was now a continental power.
Yeah.
that was, that commanded the best part of North America, the agriculturally the richest, was, its industry was booming extraordinarily once the Civil War united the country much more tightly than it ever had been before. And it was a colossus, and all these things worked. It was a great success. But the process probably culminated in World War II and the golden age of the 50s and 60s, when the economy was humming along. But it was humming along all over the world, of course. But since then, we've seen a slowdown in capitalism. The productivity has plummeted. Profit rates have fallen. The economy is just going slower and slower, and as it goes slower and slower, weird things start happening. Bubbles start developing. Huge wealth discrepancies start developing. Housing grows scarce and prohibitively expensive. Eggs cost now $13 a dozen, et cetera, et cetera. And the government, and this aged government, which seemed to work really well in the 50s, although maybe not so well if you weren't white, but it seemed to work really well in the 50s, but then it's slowing down. Yeah. It's just slowing down. There's poisonous gridlock sets in the early 90s. It doesn't go away. There are all kinds of civil war in Washington. There are stolen elections, minority presidents, a turn to the right, weird episodes like Russiagate in 2017, then an attempted coup in 2021, and then Donald Trump. The Democrats had one mission, and that was to keep Donald Trump out of office. Well,
it failed.
It failed. And now what we're seeing is an across the board democratic collapse. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, Trump is hurtling towards a dictatorship. The punishment of Columbia University, the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. These are very, very important developments, and they show that democracy is just crumbling before our very eyes. I was saying the other day, I've always wondered what it would be like to live in a dictatorship, and I'm finally getting my opportunity.
I don't want that opportunity. Daniel Lazar, thank you for this, man. I deeply appreciate this conversation. I'm fascinated by this. I think you're right. I just don't know how to fix it. Like, I am terrified of a constitutional convention. I don't trust the people who would be running that convention. I don't know. But Daniel Lazar, we're going to have to bring you back in order to have this conversation. Daniel Lazar, he's an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books: The Frozen Republic, America's Undeclared War. You can follow Daniel on X at DHLazar. And Daniel, what can they find your work and your books?
Oh, my books are on Amazon. You can just go to Amazon and look up my name. You'll find the books. I write now for several websites. One is called the Democratic Constitution blog. Another is called permanentrevolution.org. And I publish elsewhere as well.
Very cool. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
All right. I would like to go to my guest. He has been patiently waiting. Thank you for that, Esteban Carrillo. He is a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist currently writing for Cradle. How you doing, my man? It feels like it's been forever since I've talked to you. You doing okay?
Hey, Jamal, I'm doing good. Always glad to be back on the program. And good morning to everyone who's joining
Always
us.
glad to have you. The audience loves you. I appreciate you. When the dramatic collapse of Syria took place, there were people like us who felt some kind of way about it. And I'm saying that in that way because I don't live there. And yet I have a producer at the show that has his family who lives in Syria and Lebanon.
Mhm.
And there was something, it was like a punch to the gut. It was dramatic, right? This government collapsed. The US had been after Syria for decades, but the Assad government has been able to withstand the jihadists that Turkey and the US were effectively backing. And out of the blue, on a random day, it fell apart. Your soldiers take off their uniforms, were walking away, drop their weapons. You had a melting away of the state, in which case these jihadists backed by Turkey, Israel, and the US were able to effectively topple the government.
Mhm.
We said they are going to murder the minority populations. It's in the bricks. They're going to do it. They hate these people. And for all of the talk about Jelani being able to control his gang of dogs and mutts, he wasn't able to do it. And finally, when you had this kind of uprising with these people being sick of being killed over the course of all of these months that the media in the West completely whitewash, you got an uprising. And then in reprisals, you had HTS, effectively Al Qaeda or ISIS in Syria, going house to house, murdering women, children, and anybody else that's effectively at those houses in reprisals. The videos that have been coming out have been desperate, deranged in the way that somebody would do that. I've seen somebody beat children, kill children. This is what they wrought, but this is what they did.
Mhm.
And while telling us that this was democracy, this was an upspring of democracy that these jihadists took over. Give me your take on what's happening on the ground in Syria. At first, is anything I said wrong? There's that. And two,
Not at all, Jamal. You gave a pretty straightforward account, and just to remind the listeners today that this platform, your channel, has been one of the few spots in which we've had the chance to be pragmatic about what was going to happen in Syria, to be completely realist, and to go against the imposed narrative of NATO and its media partners. It's a brand new day for Syria. My God, Jamal, just remember all of the headlines that were coming out with Shara, with Ahmad al-Shara, the de facto president of Syria, calling him the reformist, calling him diversity friendly, calling him
diversity friendly. Oh, I forgot about that one.
Yeah. No,
gay friendly terrorists. Yeah,
exactly. No, and there was another one that was just horrible. That was like a moderator. That was just like the whitewashing of, as you said, the leader, not the leader. I'm sorry, the founder of Al Qaeda in Syria and the deputy commander of the founder of ISIS. This is who Ahmad al-Shara is. Up until 3 months ago, he was known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, right? He's nom de guerre. And now he's trimmed his beard. He's wearing a suit. He's getting invited to European capitals. He's set to travel to Brussels in just a few days.
Yep.
He was, hobnobbing with all of the Arab leaders last week in Riyadh. In Cairo, he went to Riyadh to meet with MBS. I mean, it's upside down world, Jamal. But what happened this weekend is exactly what we had warned, right? Because the world got a reminder of what Al Qaeda means, right? I mean, second, let's remember who Al Qaeda was, right? The whole war on terror started because of Al Qaeda. Well, according to the U.S., right? According to the U.S. government, according to George W. Bush, but they were the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks that led to everything that we are living today, right? In particular, in the region of West Asia. Well, the situation on the ground in Syria at the moment, it seems that the massacres have, if not stopped, at least slowed down. That's nothing to really celebrate because we're talking of, at the very least, about 1,000 civilians killed. Other reports talk about more. Other reports talk about thousands of that because these are ISIS dogs that were unleashed on the Alawite villages of the coastal towns of Latakia and Tartus with the sole purpose of extermination. We had the Cradle a few weeks ago. We had in one of our feature articles, we had a quote from someone within the transitional government that Shara leads in Damascus, who told us that in a private meeting, Shara said in the most calm way that the killings are going to happen and they're going to last for a few years, that it's inevitable. And, as we said, we have been warning about this because his army of thugs, the people who now we are calling the security forces of Syria, are ISIS members, are Al Qaeda members. Many of them are not even Syrian. We're talking about Turkish terrorists.
Yeah,
We're talking about
Uyghurs.
Chechens, Uyghurs, Uzbekis, etc. Right, from Central Asia. All of these maniacs who at one point decided to join the caliphate, the fight to form a caliphate, not just in Syria. Remember, ISIS wants a global caliphate, right? Al Qaeda wants to impose their beliefs on everyone, and if they don't, if they can't, or if they won't, they simply kill you, right? And as we saw over the past several days, so the transitional government, I'm going to use their terms, in reality, the Al Qaeda government has announced the formation of an independent committee to investigate the massacres. I'm sure we cannot wait to hear who's going to lead this committee, which Al Qaeda or ISIS commander is going to lead this committee. And I'm convinced they're going to have the same veracity and interest in finding the truth as when Israel investigates it.
Do their commissions, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing that it's definitely, I think at least as while this is still fresh in people's minds, right? The massacres of thousands of Alawites, civilians, is that the Gaza playbook is what is being implemented in Syria, in those coastal towns, right? From the door-to-door massacres, from the indiscriminate bombing, we saw images of these ISIS members dropping barrel bombs of helicopters. The fact that Shara at one point over the weekend issued a statement saying, stop filming yourself committing atrocities. Same thing Israel does. They don't come out and say, stop committing the atrocities. They say, stop filming yourself. So that
and that is, God, man, that is such a wild feature of modern society. Like, because it gives some kind of context to the person who's doing it. Do people film themselves doing stuff that they think is bad and wrong? Not typically. And so you would think, okay, well, maybe they don't think it's bad and wrong for them to do it. Like they are so into their mindset that I want to take a picture, like in the way that I would take a picture of me in Disney World, right? So in the way I would take a picture of me jet skiing, they take pictures of themselves committing atrocities.
Because that's what ISIS is. That's what it is, right? It's about killing. It's about murder. It's not about how can you form a government with these people, right? How can you give them the legitimacy? Like I said, Shara expected in Brussels in a few days. And remember, just a couple of months ago, it was like all of the European foreign ministers were in Damascus, one after the other, meeting with this man at the IMF, the World Bank. It's absurd.
I'll give you another one. A few months ago, he had a $10 million bounty on his head for being an ISIS leader.
And he got lifted, right? And he got lifted by the US. I mean, Jamal, it's so bad that on Friday, as these massacres were happening, as the videos were just pouring out of Syria, as the reports and the Alawites were flooding into the Russian airbase, hoping for some level of safety from these jihadi maniacs, the UK lifts the sanctions on Syria's central bank. They choose that day to announce that they have lifted the sanctions on Syria's central bank to allow for Syria's reconstruction and to bring Syria together, because they believe in the word of these a fine-dressed jihadi who says I'm all for diversity and I'm all for respecting minorities. And I mean, the EU put out a statement on Saturday saying that they condemn the attacks on the security forces. No mention of civilians.
I will do you one better. So the reporting in the United States was Assad loyalists attack the Syrian government. Assad loyalists. Like, that is such a whitewash. Like they could.
How much lower can you get, honestly?
I hate the media environment, because what they fundamentally ignore is that the Alawites and many of the minority communities supported Assad because on some level they kept them safe.
Yeah, you don't even know. I mean, you don't even know if these people actually supported Assad, because one thing that I think has been completely lost in the mix is that nobody in Syria wants Assad back. You can go in Syria, throw a stone, and no. You can go in Syria and ask anyone, and they will tell you, we don't want Assad back. Like, life under Assad was terrible, but that doesn't mean that life under these people is any better. It's definitely worse.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah. God, man, my heart goes out to what is taking place there. One of the interesting things, though, the United States and Russia apparently went to the UN Security Council trying to get a UN Security Council resolution on what's taking place there. Tulsi Gabbard, is director of national intelligence. Gabbard has been pretty vocal about this idea of, oh my God, we have a jihadist terrorist leading Syria right now. This is outrageous. And at the very least in the US, they would talk about, okay, they're killing Christians because that's all we care about, right? Like, they're killing Christians. This is horrible. This is outrageous. We should do something about it. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you think a UN Security Council resolution would do anything? What would it even mean to have a UN Security Council resolution about something like this? I mean, unless you're putting boots on the ground, it's not really going to matter, I suppose.
Exactly. Or like, what are you gonna do? Like, start sanctioning the country that you've been telling us for the past 3 months that it's, the newborn Syria, the Syria of the future. Like, it goes against your own narrative, right? Against everything that you've been trying to impose, even up to the last recent, the last few days. The one power that could, over the weekend, pick up the phone and stop all of these massacres was Turkey. It was Turkey, because these are Turkish folks.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Because one of the interesting things, too, during the Latakia uprising, Turkey was sending troops in order to put down the uprising. Because HTS, Al-Qaeda, apparently didn't have enough animals in order to put down the protests that was taking place in those regions. Well, Turkey, their hands are covered in blood.
Turkey is completely behind this. I mean, let's recap a bit for maybe people who are unfamiliar with what happened over the past several days. It was on Thursday that a group's calling themselves a few months ago in January, I think, there was a group of the remnants of the Syrian Arab army that dissolved right when Assad fell, put out a statement saying that the formation of the Islamic resistance in Syria. That they would liberate Syria, etc. And on Thursday, there were these ambushes on HTS patrols. HTS Al Qaeda, the rebranded Al Qaeda. It's a group that Shara leads still, and they get attacked. They get killed by these former soldiers in the Syrian Arab army. They put out a statement signed by a former general, saying that they're going to liberate Syria, that they're going to liberate it from the terrorist elements, that they're going to liberate it from Israel, because Israel is occupying about 500 square kilometers of southern Syria, which is something that the transitional government in Damascus doesn't seem to give a flying F about. And so they attack them, and that's what sparks the violence, right? Because they start clashing. There are clashes initially, but then these clashes immediately devolve into revenge killings, into ethnic cleansing, into a new genocide of Alawites, with that justification. And that's what gives Western media and the EU the ammo to come out and say, oh, we condemn the attacks by the Assad remnants. Assad is whatever. Like I said, there's no one in Syria that wants Assad back. I don't think even Assad wants to go back. He's happy in Moscow. He made his choice. This man left without even giving a statement, without even saying a word. Remember that. He left Damascus in the middle of the night and fled for Moscow, where he's living now safely with his family. Right? There's no love lost for this man. There wasn't any love lost for this man in Syria. And I think the fact that his army dissolved in the way that it did, and he had to flee in the way that he did in complete silence under the cover of night, shows you how much support Bashar al-Assad has in Syria, right? This man was being held up thanks to Iranian and Russian influence. But that obviously changed following the election of Donald Trump. And I think we're seeing the shape of it in recent days, right? Today, Saudi Arabia is hosting talks between Ukraine and Russia. The US already cut all military aid to Ukraine. So this does every day appear to be like a give and take situation, right? Like, okay, we'll
wait. You got to go back on that one. What do you mean give and take?
I feel like Syria was, again, I think I said this before, but this is just my opinion, because just like connecting the dots and knowing everything that we knew up to that point. And to me, it's just Russia realizing that they could get something out of the Trump White House. And, what is the benefit of Assad anymore for us? At the end of the day,
because disagree on this. We still disagree. I'm sorry. Make your point. Make your point.
No, that's it. That is really it. To me, it's what happened in Syria was not it didn't come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
It was not like not this popular movement that all of a sudden decided that I'm gonna march on Damascus and we're gonna take power to make life better for all Syrians. No, what happened was there was an order, like a phone was picked up, and Giuliani was told, time to shave your beard, lose the turban, go to we'll send you some suits, we'll send some tailors. For all of your jihadi maniacs that have been running amok in Idlib, because Shara was in control of Idlib for like 5 years, and they start marching down on Damascus, and it's like Jamar, when Afghanistan, when the U.S. left Afghanistan in 2021, and the Taliban was marching on Kabul, the U.S. trained Afghan army was essentially folding as they went. Right, there was no opposition, there was no fighting. When the Taliban would arrive to a new village, the commanders of the army would sit down with them, and they would reach an agreement, and they would leave at their arms and go. And that took the Taliban to reach Kabul and take control of Kabul about 3 months. Syria, it happened in like 8 days, less. It was about a week in which this happened, and so this is not a. There was no opposition, there was no battles. There's still a lot of obscurity about what actually happened with the Syrian army during those days, because there's reports that they were getting orders saying, lay down your weapons, don't fight, keep retreating. And officially, what the government and the army were saying was like, we are, strategic retreats to better, protect Damascus, to better protect whatever. And these strategic retreats ended with, Assad getting on a plane and flying to Russia. So, you don't need to be Nostradamus, or you don't need a crystal ball or to be an insider in Washington, D.C. to even start to wonder, right? Like there's obviously something going on behind the scenes here. And because Syria at this point is being completely Balkanized. Syria is the South, like I said, controlled by Israel. Israel is not going. Israel has said it very clearly. And if there's one thing that you can that you can trust, I guess, in Israeli leaders is that they do kind of stand by their word, right? When they say we're going to kill all these people, they go and they kill all these people. When we're going to occupy this land, they usually don't give it back. So the government, the transitional government in Syria a few weeks ago puts out this map that shows Syria without the Golan Heights, essentially saying, okay, the Golan Heights is Israeli, and without an area in the northwest, which is also, that Turkey has occupied. And now you have, last night, the U.S.-backed Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, signed an agreement with Shara on the eve of this horrible massacre, in which they agreed to be folded into this terrorist-led government, right? So all of a sudden, Shara has also control of the northeast of Syria, right, where the Kurds are holding, with the help of the U.S., they've been holding Syria's largest oil fields, their wheat fields, and a bunch of ISIS prison camps where thousands of ISIS members are being held, and their families as well. This is Turkey.
The former ISIS commander, or the leader, Jelani, has now gained access to ISIS prisoners that were being held in northern Syria.
It's unclear if they are actually going to be in control. They say they are, right? Like they're looking for some legitimacy. SDF commanders have said this morning that it's still not determined who's going to take control of the prisons, because you would hope that there's still like a voice in the room saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't give the ISIS army to the ISIS guy.
This is a bad idea.
He just committed a horrible massacre, killing thousands of, in sectarian revenge killings, entire families wiped off the civil registry. Maybe let's not, right? Maybe let's give it to somebody else. But the transitional government is saying that they're also going to take control of the border areas with Iraq, which needs to launch, an endless array of exclamation marks in the security apparatus in Iraq, because we defeated ISIS in our country thanks to Iranian help around 2017, and we wiped them out, and now we're going to have them on our borders. Al Qaeda and all of these foreign terrorists are going to become the security forces on our western border. We're living in the upside down world.
I've heard the argument that Russia made a deal in order to basically a quid pro quo. you give us something in Ukraine, we'll give you something in Syria. The only reason I disagree with that is because it was under the Biden administration, and Joe Biden was a lunatic on the issue of Ukraine. We're with you for as long as it takes. We're going to keep going, etc. And I guess for me,
Business for him.
well, I guess for me, Russia just won.
True.
Like, the reason that Donald Trump is coming to the negotiating table is because there was nowhere else to go. Like, meaning your forces got fundamentally destroyed. And what's about to happen in Kursk right now, and what took place over the last few days, where they have completely collapsed. And it was so bad that people thought Putin did this on purpose, which I don't buy, but whatever. They make the point of saying Ukraine lost so many forces, so much material, so much manpower in the Kursk region that this had to be a grand master plan by Putin. But that gets across how bad they are getting destroyed on the battlefield. And so if you're Trump and you're coming in and you're seeing this, you're like, okay, they fundamentally won. We need to stop this. It's getting us to the brink of a third World War, one. And two, our economy is not better off in this situation. And so Russia has demonstrated their military prowess, their competence on the battlefield in a way that we don't need to keep going in this. This is Joe Biden's war. I want to end it. I said I was going to end it, so I'm going to end it. I don't see a quid pro quo in that. I do see a situation where it seems like the Syrian military was melting away. Either they were being paid, either they didn't want to fight for Assad, and they were dealing with a force that was better equipped. Tanks, armored vehicles. I mean, the West and Turkey had loaded these guys up with military armaments and equipment that the Syrian army couldn't necessarily countenance. Not to mention if they were also being paid off, or if you had people who were in the Syrian government who was telling them, put down your weapons and walk away. I don't know. Give me your take on that. I mean, I guess I have a hard time believing that Russia was working with Joe Biden on a quid pro quo in Syria for something in Ukraine, when up to that point, Joe Biden was lunatic. He was out of his mind.
But like I said, Jamal, this all came to be right after the election of Donald Trump, when that shoe dropped and it was apparent. I mean, from that moment on, Joe Biden was a dead man walking. If he wasn't before, right? Like,
He was a dead man walking
situation
too, but fair enough, yeah.
with that president. But because there could have been more resistance. There really could have, from the Syrian army. And I think that the attacks that we saw on Thursday against the Al Qaeda security forces shows that. It puts it on display. Because before Giuliani and his thugs arrived to Damascus, the Syrian army was still equipped. They had still an air force. They still had the armament that Israel then destroyed. Because remember that Giuliani comes to Damascus, Assad flees, and the first thing that happens is Israel starts bombing the hell out of Syria, hundreds upon hundreds of times, a ferocious campaign that destroys every remnant of the military power, the arsenal, etc., and whatever was left. The Giuliani thugs have them in their hands now, and whatever these new resistance faction, whatever, I don't remember their name, whatever they could carry in their hands, right? But just the fact that it was just like a retreat after retreat, to me shows me, right? Because at the same time as this happened in Syria is when the ceasefire talks start finally getting serious in Gaza, right? And you have a Steve Witkoff already traveling to Israel and forcing the Israeli officials to meet on the Sabbath to iron out a deal that now is completely being violated, completely being thrown to the side. But at that point, it was happening. So I think it pointed out. I think all of these developments, what they did is they point to a White House, to a leader that was very interested in starting his term with a bang, right?
Yeah.
Everything changes. Everything's different now. Like the past 4 years of Biden have been just like this endless status quo that has just been dragging on everywhere. Now I'm going to change the status quo. Is it a better one? That's up for debate, honestly. We don't know.
But there's the other thing to this. Russia and Iran wanted Syria on their side. Like, meaning, I think it's a pain in the ass for Russia to have to deal with a Syrian government that is on some level hostile to that same Russia and is obsequious to the West. That, like, all of these things are negatives. Like even with dealing with Iran, Iran has been fundamentally kicked out of Syria. I mean,
Yes,
Hezbollah.
Iran is a big loser of what happened.
Yeah, they
Well,
are.
no, I'm
But
sorry, it's
so,
the second big
but
loser.
so is Russia in this, which is why I've already, like when Lavrov came out that meeting, Lavrov looked pissed. It's almost as if Turkey screwed them in this.
You know, the reality here is that Russia is a country that I feel too often gets lumped in mistakenly with what we know as the resistance axis, right? Maybe we consider them too close of an ally. But in reality, Russia is out for themselves. Russia really is out.
Yeah. Right. No disagreement, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you. They're not part of the resistance.
Yeah,
But they have
not at all. And I mean, Iran is, right? Like just for context. So when Damascus falls, when Giuliani rises, like I said, the second biggest loser is Iran. The biggest loser is the Syrian people, without a doubt.
Agreed.
But geopolitically, Iran loses a lot. But then there's also the question, Jamal, because is Iran also rethinking its position in the region, right? Because before we go to Iran, with Russia is partners with Turkey. They're friendly. Yeah. They're completely friendly with Turkey. There's no animosity there. And
Russia, frenemies. I said frenemies because Erdogan is purely out for himself.
Of course, 100%. Yes, Erdogan is out to recreate the Ottoman Empire. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that he's gonna go and all of a sudden start fighting Russia or even sanctioning Russia, right? Turkey has been trying to play both sides for a while now. They've been pretty successful at it. They've been very successful at it. And you also need to consider that Russia is not really. There's not a lot of animosity against Israel in Russia. There's not, it's not like it's not like I don't know, South Africa, right? Like South Africa has taken a pretty strong stance against Israel. You have a handful of other nations that have done the same, but nations like Russia or China, they have not, because of their own geopolitical considerations. And in my view, is because we are already so preoccupied with any other things. Why even pick this fight, right? Like this fight is not our fight.
Well, they've criticized pretty heavily. I mean, especially with Israel's association with the United States.
Yeah, but Turkey has been, Erdogan has been calling Netanyahu Hitler. And then their ties are as fine as they have ever been. So
that's
as
fair.
far as Iran, I think, well, just to finish my thought, that I think, Iran is also, I think
it was obvious. Rethinking their position in the region. Explain what you mean by rethinking.
The war that just wrapped up a few months ago in the region, right? That destroyed parts of Lebanon. We saw what happened in Gaza and in the West Bank. What is happening now? It was very costly. It was very costly in terms of not just of cash or arms, even in people, right? But also in what you would call a geopolitical standing, right? Into Israel was so violent with the help of the West, with the help of NATO, that I think there was a big concern in Iran about actually getting dragged into this war, right? Because I think at some point in Iran, they came to the realization that this was actually a very much existential war. That this was, this could very well end the Islamic Republic, and I think that threat's still there. So Iran really is, they're swimming in shark-infested waters, that nation. And I think that this is why you've seen over recent weeks, this back and forth between the president and, his sphere of influence, Pezeshkian, and Khamenei, right, the supreme leader, into whether Iran should or should not have talks with the United States for a new nuclear deal. And for a while, that was really back and forth, for like a couple of weeks or for a couple of months, really. It was really coming and going. But in the past couple of weeks, I think they finally aligned. And they are saying we will not negotiate anything with the United States while under pressure, while under maximum pressure sanctions, and while under threats, right, of essentially war, because they're having these threats. But when Syria was falling, Iran, I think, they really saw the writing on the wall. And now, my theory of that, Iran rethinking its position in the region, is, I think, clearly seen in Lebanon, where Hezbollah has completely taken a step back. They still say, right? The Hezbollah Secretary General still says, just yesterday, he said that the resistance will not allow for Israel to continue its occupation of the South. that it's inevitable. Well, he inferred that it was inevitable that there would be a new confrontation. But that, like I said, like Erdogan comes out and puts out these statements. Russia comes out and the statements are one thing. The statements can say anything you want. Sharaf puts out a statement saying, I'm going to investigate the mass killings. That doesn't mean he's
right. Right.
So I feel like for now, the Hezbollah is also playing this game.
Yeah.
This game of we'll stay out here in the public sphere, right? We will pull out statements, we'll say this, we'll say that. But there's not an interest really in returning to the war. I really, really doubt that there's any interest from anyone in the resistance or in Iran or, even left. I don't know, well, in Syria maybe still, but Hezbollah has really stepped back and taken their position as a political party for the past couple of months at least. We'll see what happens next.
The Iran thing is fascinating. I had this conversation with Dr. Morandi. I'm sorry, with Professor Morandi.
I'm sure Morandi has completely different outview from what I say.
Well, yeah, So his thing was there's an alignment between the president and the Ayatollah at this point. And my thing to him was, at this point, but clearly there was a disagreement between the presidential office, meaning the governmental space, and this space above the government in regards to the Ayatollah. Mm-hmm. And Pezeshkian may have aligned himself with the Ayatollah because, but the fact that there was a public spat between the two is fascinating. Yeah. Like, I'm not aware of there being a public spat between the government and then this entity above the government in prior terms. But this was something that took place in public because otherwise we wouldn't even know about it. And so Pezeshkian wanted to negotiate. He seemed to be more open to this idea of, hey, let's have talks with the US. And the Ayatollah was, we've done that. We're not doing that again.
Man, they already screwed us once.
Said it one more time.
They already screwed us once. The US walked out of the deal.
Exactly. Ayatollah was there for it, right? It wasn't like, this happened 50 years ago. They just killed the JCPOA within my lifetime, within your lifetime.
7 years ago. It's been 7 years.
Yeah, this was less than a decade ago. Trump was the guy to kill the JCPOA. And as Morandi made a really good point, he says Trump is all over the place. I mean, Trump is ending deals with Canada and Mexico that he himself negotiated, that he said was the best deal on the planet. Eliminated the JCPOA, just blew it out the water for no reason at all, just because he came in. He didn't necessarily care about it. When Trump came in the last time around, he destroyed NAFTA, another deal that was negotiated. If you're looking at what took place with the Minsk agreements, if you're looking at what took place with the Istanbul agreements, or the nuclear agreements, or the missile agreements that the US had with Russia, they blew all that stuff away. And I'm not saying Trump was the only one to do it. I'm saying Morandi's point is the US is an untrustworthy actor. And of all the untrustworthy actors, Trump is the apex of that. Yeah. Well, how can you make a deal with somebody like that who's throwing out threats at the exact same time? Meaning this thing that Trump does of, well, I'm going to be hyperbolic, but I'm going to send my people to negotiate. How can you ever trust that in the terms that Iran may get? It's not going to necessarily be favorable because they think you're weak, as opposed to Russia, who just won a war, in which case, okay, now we have to deal with you on equal terms because you just kicked our ass in a war. Iran is in a particular space where they don't believe they can negotiate with the US because they don't believe that they can get anything legitimate out that deal on equal terms. And so Pezeshkian seems to be more I'm going to use the term naive. Somebody may disagree with that. More naive on this front. Keep in mind, Pezeshkian was the same guy who they told, hey, we're going to get a deal, so don't attack Israel. And he went for weeks without a response, believing that, well, the US is going to get a deal in the Middle East. Joe Biden never got the deal. Yeah. Give me your take on that. I said a lot, but give me your take on what I just said there.
No, I think actually, you know what you're saying, and especially what Dr. Morandi said is completely on point. It's completely on point. Yeah. Russian diplomats have a term for the US, and that's agreement incapable. The United States is agreement incapable. They cannot go to any agreement. And it's not just the US, right? I think Israel is a perfect example of a nation that is agreement incapable. So I think it's it makes sense, right? Like because there was a shakeup in the Iranian government just a few days ago. The Iranian minister got sacked, the economic minister, I'm sorry, and Zarif, right? One of the people who negotiated the JCPOA, Javad Zarif, was also tendered his resignation, apparently under pressure, right? Because in Iran you have these two camps, right? The reformists and the non-reformists, the people who are more aligned with the with what the supreme leader says. And with the reformists, obviously, there's always this desire to open up more to the West. But I think recent history has shown us that you cannot trust, right? And I think what you said about Donald Trump is completely on point, because exactly, right? How can you trust a man that today puts tariffs on Canada and Mexico only to lift them tomorrow? He's already done that twice.
Right.
He's like he's like a child running amok, right? Like just trying to see, like in a candy store, right? Just trying to grab everything, put it back, move this here, see what works, right? I feel like this is gonna be the defining characteristic of this Trump term, is just open everything. Just come in and just grab the table and throw it over and see where everything lands, and see if you can get better deals for the U.S. Or I don't even know if it's really this is about let's get a better deal for the U.S. Populace. I feel like let's get a better deal for ourselves. Let's get a better deal for our industries. But who knows what's going to happen, because any deal that they get with Iran is going to be a completely different deal than the JCPOA, and it's not gonna. And at this point, Iran is gonna have way more enriched uranium close to weapons grade than they did back in 2015 or 2018.
Right. But they don't want a nuclear bomb, oddly enough. And I'm saying oddly enough because
that's what they say. Bomb, I don't know if at this point we can trust the word anymore.
You don't buy it. I mean, like they're put in this kind of position where they're pushed in a corner. Yeah, and exactly. There have been people saying, "Hey, in the same way that North Korea has that nuclear bomb, and you can't hit North Korea because they have a nuclear weapon. Maybe you need to do the same. Israel has a nuclear bomb. Like, what is your protective mechanism?" Well, they've always said, "Well, we can close the Strait of Hormuz, and we can effectively destroy the oil industry if we need to, and if we're attacked. That's our nuclear weapon." Give me your take on that. I mean, like, Trump has been making threats as if he's going to attack Iran. I'm suspicious of that, just because I think it would destroy his presidency if he did, and I think he knows it. But he still will make threats, just like he will make towards North Korea or any particular country.
Yeah.
Give me a take.
Well, U.S. Supremacy needs to be protected at all costs, first of all, or the idea of it, right? The idea of we are the strongest army, we are capable of doing anything we want. So, of course, I feel like that's where a lot of these the threats of war stem. Because, as you say, the actual logistics of launching a war against Iran, it's going to be difficult. What troops are going to go into? I mean, are you going to send the jihadis in Syria to get cut down at the Iranian border? Or is Israel? How is Israel going to march on Iran? Their best option, their only option, really, is long-range attacks, or even nuclear weapons that they can launch, that Israel does have. And Iran, they say they don't. They say they don't want one. But I think, again, the last war was more than enough evidence to show that you need some sort of deterrence. You cannot just continue to trust in the word of your enemy, or think that you can. What good is it going to be to blockade the oil markets if all of a sudden 2-3 nuclear bombs are hitting Iran and Tehran and other big cities? It's not going to do.
I think it's more complicated than that, though. I mean, the security agreement that they signed with Russia, I mean, it goes beyond security.
Oh, yes.
The part that my eyes popped up was security. And what does that mean? Does that mean S-400 missiles?
The security agreement they signed, it doesn't call for intervention if a nation gets attacked. It just calls for in the case Iran gets attacked, Russia wouldn't join those attacking Iran.
Right, but they would help significantly, and I strongly suspect that they're helping significantly now by beefing up Iran's security architecture.
Yeah, I mean, like this bull in a China shop strategy for Trump. What he's doing is bringing allies closer together.
Yes, kind of. It's interesting. This is going to sound very weird. there's parts of me that like this. I'm sick of status quo.
Yeah.
And I'm sick of status quo in regards to foreign policy. I'm sick of status quo in regard to the way we operate as a country, especially around the globe. And I agree with you. Trump is a bull in a china shop. And a lot of this stuff I don't like just because it's upending in the way that we operate. But at some level, I think we need to upend the way we operate.
Completely.
Like NATO is a really good example of this. NATO should not exist. It just shouldn't. It's a funding mechanism and an old home for generals that posture and say all of this nonsense, but in no way, when they finally got the war that they wanted against Russia, lost. They lost billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars just blown up on the White House lawn. And, it's like, okay, so your entire reason for existence was to fight the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went belly up, and the spiritual successor, being Russia, is a much smaller country with a much smaller economy. And you still lost. They have an $80 billion a year military budget. They spent $350 billion just from the United States alone and lost. Like, you think to yourself, why are we doing this? Why does this thing exist? Like, why are we spending all of this money for this nonsense? And Trump comes in and said, I'm done with this. I'm calling it a day. And I applaud. Thank you for that.
Yeah, 100%.
We are going to pay attention to U.S. concerns. And again, I'm like, good. But then, of course, he's a maniac for Israel and this kind of weird Israel first policy. I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I would just say it's a mixed bag. I'm sick of the status quo. So I love the fact that status quo is being upended. But the bull in the China shop thing.
No. And honestly, what you said here is the most concerning thing, the Israel first policy. He's not an America first president. He's an Israel first president. So was Joe Biden. So was Obama. So was Bush. You just keep going back.
Yeah. With the exception of Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
Have you heard, somebody made the point of saying Richard Nixon was the last progressive president we ever had, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Nixon has this conversation. He's being interviewed. And he says, there are times where American interests and Israel interests diverge. And you have to effectively tell them, no, that this is, my job as an American president is to be an American president. And while there'll be many issues that we would agree with Israel on, they're a settler colonial state. We want our little colony in the Middle East. All that stuff is fine. But there will be times where they would want something that goes against American interests. And it is our job to say, no. That is the last president to say that.
AIPAC has done a very good job in the decades in between.
Do you think it's, and this could be the last question, is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? A lot of people, I ask that because there are a lot of people who come on the show who believe that Israel has full control of American and U.S. policy. There are other people who are in the military who would say that is not the case. That say, regardless of how this looks, it is the U.S. effectively working with their colony in the Middle East to expand influence in that region. And as far as Israel expands, we look at it as it is in our best interest. So we will help, assist, give money to that particular cause. Whereas it looks as if you're on the outside looking in, that it is Israel controlling it, but really it's the U.S. in control of what is happening in that region. What's your take on that? Do you think it's the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog?
I think it looks like the tail wagging the dog, but I feel like that is kind of washing the hands of the United States too much. Because, for example, let's just focus on Gaza for a second, right? Everything that has happened in Gaza since October 7, 2023, couldn't have happened without the approval and the help of the United States, right? When we talk about the genocide in Gaza, it's not just an Israeli genocide. This is a U.S.-Israeli genocide, U.S.-Israeli-German genocide, right? Because it couldn't have happened without the complete support that they received. And, you can say it was Biden. You can say, that he should have been stronger, whatever. It could have been anyone sitting in the White House. The situation would have been exactly the same, because there is this, when we talk about Israel as a settler colonial state, we shouldn't forget that the United States is the same. It was founded on the same principles. It was founded under possibly an even more horrific genocide under the slave trade, thanks to the slave trade. And when that went away, They started implementing the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America, just like taking all of our resources. And it started, to spread to the rest of the world. And Israel does the same in the Arab world. It's the same mentality. It's the same settler colonial mentality. The only difference today, we have smartphones. The only difference today, we have the internet. That is truly the only difference is the fact that this is happening in the present day. And I feel that this is, first of all, where their visions align. And second of all, like you said, right, like Israel is too valuable for the United States in the region to let go, to allow anything to happen to it, including the formation of a Palestinian state, because the United States can say all they want about they support a two-state solution. If they really supported a two-state solution, they would have done something to, first of all, enforce the Oslo Accords of 1992, and then to over the past couple of decades, they have had plenty of opportunities to allow the Palestinians to form their own government, to get sovereignty, to get living conditions, because you don't fight resistance. I mean, decent, respectable living conditions, because you don't fight resistance with weapons. You don't fight it with violence. You fight it with ideas, and you fight it by offering a better system. That's the way you defeat resistance. And that's simply not, and that's something that neither Israel nor the US are interested in the least in doing.
Yeah. I had this argument. It was an argument with Netanyahu's press secretary. And those are frustrating conversations. Mm-hmm. Because to me, in the conversation, I go with this idea that I would say, hey, logically speaking, if you put people in horrible conditions, those people are going to do horrible things in order to push back on those horrible conditions. Like, basically, I am what you made me. So wouldn't you need something, some state for the Palestinians where there can be security for both? And of course, it's like, no.
No, because it's our land. Because the Bible
says none of what you said matters. We don't care. Basically, that was the argument. We don't care. Meaning, it's difficult to have an argument in this situation because the reality of it is we are trying to take over. Do you get that? We don't give a shit about this other stuff. Our job is to expand and to take over that territory. It is not about your logic. It's not about what's right. It's not about any of that stuff. We want to take over. Okay, fair enough. There's no way to have that argument, right? Like, that's not even putting up a false pretense of an argument. It's just that is not our objective.
Yeah.
And so anything that I say is in pursuant of my overarching objective, which is to take over the territory. Like, it's just a wild conversation to have. Esteban, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Esteban Camilo, Ecuadorian-based journalist currently. Ecuadorian journalist currently writing for The Cradle. He was previously with Sir English. Esteban, where can people find your work besides The Cradle?
You can find us on social media at The Cradle Media. You can find me at Esteban Carlop, my Twitter handle, and on YouTube too. Check out our podcast, The Cradle News Roundup.
Oh, badass, man. Thank you for this. Really appreciate it, Esteban.
Thank you, Jamal. I'll talk to you next time.
Be safe. All right. I have the man of the hour. I always appreciate these conversations every time I talk to him. We're joined with the one and only John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou, CIA officer. John, welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you.
John, what are you are doing presentations? You told me about this, that you were effectively going around giving speeches. Where can people find those speeches before we start?
They are at tigerslanestudios.com. So I did my first 4 speech. I'm doing a 150 speech around the world tour over the next year. I did so far Belfast, Dublin, Cork, and Manchester. Now I'm headed to, let me think. I'm headed to Newcastle upon Tyne in a couple of weeks. Edinburgh, Glasgow, Sheffield.
Oh, Edinburgh is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I bought my first kilt from Edinburgh.
Oh, that's funny.
No underwear.
No.
No underwear. Just wear it like a man.
That's right.
Wear it like a man. Nobody came here to hear that. They're like, why is he telling us that? What can you give us context to what the speeches are about?
Yeah, they're mostly about my career at the CIA, and then we talk a lot about, current international developments. The truth is that 6 or 7 months ago, for reasons that will probably never be clear to me, I somehow hit the YouTube algorithm sweet spot. And so where my YouTube videos used to get 800 hits or 1,000 hits, I'm now getting 5 million, 10 million. Some of the shorts have gotten as many as 30 million. And so it came to the attention of a production company in London that had represented the 2 DEA agents who killed Pablo Escobar and sent them on a worldwide tour. And so these guys called me and asked if I was interested in a conversation. I said, I'm always interested in a conversation. The next day, they flew to Washington from London with a contract. We met with my attorney. I signed it the next day. 6 weeks later, I started speaking.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Oh, congratulations.
Big break for me. Thank you.
Wow, that is fantastic. I guess I want to start in Syria. You were a CIA agent. You and I've had conversations about some of the things where you were like apprehending, let's say, terrorists or people who attacked the U.S.
Yes.
And I was fascinated by that stuff in regards to the way the CIA operates. The reality of it is, though, in Syria, it was not for the betterment of Syria. They were undermining the Assad government. And whatever people think of Assad, the fact of the matter is the killings that have been taking place in Syria over the last several days is a direct result of Assad falling. And it was something that people like me and people who've analyzed the stuff kept saying, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. It is going to happen. These people are rabid animals. This is going to happen.
And let me interrupt you. You and I were criticized by the Washington Post a year and a half ago because we said this was going to happen. And the Washington Post called us, when you and I were both on the Sputnik network, they called us Russian sympathizers.
Yep.
I said on my show on Sputnik that whether you like Bashar al-Assad's politics or not, he was the only thing standing between Syria's Christian community and complete annihilation. And here we are a year and a half later, and that is exactly what's happening. The Alawis are being wiped out. At least 600, probably closer to 1,100, were killed over the weekend. And Christians are being caught up in these massacres. And who is carrying out the massacres? It's the Al-Qaeda group endorsed by the United States. It's the Al-Qaeda group that U.S. officials met with just a month or so ago. Assistant Secretary of State Barbara Leaf, accompanied by the Assistant Secretary for Hostage Negotiations and a whole group of lower level people, to say we're lifting the bounty on the new president's head, Jelani, and the United States doesn't have any objection to you consolidating power in Syria. What did they think was going to happen? We told them what was going to happen. We told them that these massacres were going to take place. We told them that minority communities would be wiped out. And that is exactly now what's taking place. And the United States acts like, oh my gosh, we're shocked that massacres are taking place.
We had no idea this was going to happen. This was the pro-democracy terrorists.
Yes, exactly.
The pro-gay, pro-diversity.
Exactly.
United.
Don't worry. The gays that they threw off the roof of buildings, that was just an anomaly. That wasn't an actual policy, right?
I'm curious, when the CIA is following the president's orders, Obama had spent billions of dollars to try to undercut Assad. I mean, in fact, when Donald Trump came in, apparently Trump killed the program.
Yes, he
did.
Is
Operation Sycamore, I believe.
Yes.
The Timber Sycamore.
Correct.
When they're doing this stuff, do they think to themselves, okay, this is not morally good. This is dubious in regards to its outcome. Even if you take morality out, the outcome, the consequences are going to be to the detriment of people in general. Like, do they think about that stuff, or is it, I'm doing God's work?
I can tell you in my 15 years at the CIA, I never, not one single time, ever participated in a conversation about the end game. Never. Because the CIA doesn't care about the end game. They'll deal with it when it comes. But if the president tells you to implement a policy, then by God, you go out there and implement the policy. And if the policy is overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and don't think about what comes next. Just overthrow them, and then we'll deal with the rest later. That's what they do.
Oh, that is difficult to count. But that is deeply unsettling. But I suppose that's the way the military functions too. Go out and do this job. Don't think about what it. We are paying attention to it. It is under our control. Go out and do it. Wow, that is unfortunate.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
That is deeply unfortunate. From the standpoint of the Syrian government, how did they work to undercut Assad? And the reason why I'm asking this question is when the Assad government fell, the military just melted. It just collapsed.
Yeah, it did.
And people, even now, are still questioning, how did that happen? They didn't put up a fight. They didn't put up a resistance. For all intents and purposes, they put down their weapons and they effectively left. I have to believe that on some level, there was something working behind the scenes in order to affect that outcome. How does the CIA operate?
You're thinking in a manner that's too sophisticated. You're thinking in a manner that's too well planned out. The United States takes a position. The position is we're going to support Syria's Kurds and we're going to support elements of Al-Qaeda, right? And we'll just keep up the pressure. We'll keep up the pressure forever if that's what it takes. Because the pressure is not just on the Syrian government, it's also on the Iranians and on the Russians, both of whom had a presence there.
Right.
The Turks, on the other hand, were different. The Turks were far more proactively engaging in Syria, more proactively attempting to overthrow the government. It was the Turks who were the masterminds of this thing. The United States, I'm sure, would very much like to take credit for it. But really, this was the Turks. I think that in the White House, in the CIA, in the State Department, Defense Department, I think they were all genuinely surprised at the quickness with which this government was overthrown. Because remember, you've got the Russians there, not just with troops on the ground, but with a naval base as well. And you have the Iranians that have a well-established pipeline from Iran across Iraq into Syria, and then by extension into Lebanon, that amounted to nothing. It just collapsed. So really, it was the Turks that were sort of commanding this thing. It was the Turks that decided when to move against Assad when he was at his weakest. And I maintain, and I may be wrong, but I think I'm not. I think the Turks had been secretly working with the Israelis to coordinate this thing. I think that this anger between Ankara and Jerusalem, I think it was all put on.
Agreed.
I think that behind the scenes, the Turks and the Israelis were working very closely together.
They were moving together.
Yeah.
I mean, like it seems like they were coordinated.
The Israelis weren't taken by surprise when Assad fell. And because they weren't taken by surprise, that leads me to believe that they were a part of it all along.
And by the way, the Israelis said as much. And Erdogan was like, no, how dare they say it? It's like, okay,
exactly.
You're protesting.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I brought you on because it was something that took place in regards to Iran, that there was a disagreement, I'll say it that way, between Pezeshkian and the Ayatollah on whether or not to have negotiations with the United States. Yes. Now, Donald Trump has been saying two things out of the side of both sides of his mouth.
Right.
In one sense, we're not scared of Iran. We'll hurt Iran. If we have to attack them, it'll be bad for everybody. And then he would say, however, I do want negotiations. I want to, redo a nuclear deal. Now, Pezeshkian seemed open to it. The Ayatollah was like, we're not doing this.
No.
Especially not under threats. We're not going to get anything out of this if they believe that they can threaten us into some kind of deal. No. Full stop. No, it's not happening. Which created a disagreement between the government of Iran versus this like religious entity above the government in Iran, almost like the king coming in and saying, Pezeshkian eventually aligned his point of view with the Ayatollah because the Ayatollah is the ruling body, in which case the government has to effectively acquiesce. But there was obviously a disagreement in how to move forward on this particular issue. Donald Trump is an unreliable actor.
Yeah.
So any deal that you make with him, he can change his mind later. And I guess that's kind of the Ayatollah's point. We filled out the JCPO, they blew it away. The US blew away the Minsk agreements, they blew away all of the missile agreements with Russia. Why will we make a deal with a country that is unreliable in regards to the way they operate? Why does the government have a different perspective, though? I mean, doesn't the government know everything that I just said, everything the Ayatollah has already said, and yet Pezeshkian still is like, I want a deal. Why the disagreement from your point of view?
So I have a very, very close friend who just got back from Tehran. She was there for 6 weeks, and she's a very astute observer of these kinds of things. I have the same questions that you have. And so she told me that here in the United States, we seriously overestimate President Pezeshkian. That we believed here in the U.S. that Pezeshkian had the support of most Iranians. He's a reformer. They chose a reformer on purpose. And she said that's just all wrong. She said the conservatives had a weak candidate. Pezeshkian won because he was the lesser of two evils. And he just doesn't have a mandate. He's not popular among the religious faction of the government, among the Ayatollahs. And he just doesn't have the authority to act on these kinds of things. On all issues of foreign and military policy, of course, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, makes all final decisions. So Donald Trump gets elected president, and we're not sure which Donald Trump is talking about Iran policy. Is it the Donald Trump that wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize by making peace with the Iranians? Or is it Donald Trump that would like to make a historical name for himself by smashing Iran, overthrowing the government, and taking these Ayatollahs out of power? You know, I have said many times that I was cautiously optimistic that Donald Trump would be the Richard Nixon of this generation, where we used to say only Nixon could go to China. Only Nixon could make peace with China and could enact détente with the Russians, and perhaps only Trump could go to Tehran. And I think that I got it wrong. You know, if you look back at Admiral McRaven's autobiography that came out just after Trump lost the 2020 election, McRaven says in that autobiography that he and Trump were in a conversation about North Korea. And Trump said that he was considering using nuclear weapons against North Korea, just to be done with it once and for all. And McRaven said he practically panicked when he heard the words come out of Trump's mouth. And he said, he reactively said, well, you know what would really throw the North Koreans off is if you write them a letter and offer peace talks. And that was the basis for the so-called love letters between Trump and Kim Jong-un. It wasn't that Trump had this grand idea for peace. It's that he was talked out of using nuclear weapons. Well, I wonder if the same is happening now in Iran. And does he have somebody like McRaven saying, wait a minute, you know what would really throw them off is if you try to make peace with the Iranians. So on the one hand, we do know that Trump is obsessed with winning the Nobel Peace Prize. But on the other hand, he hates Iran. He's already killed General Qasem Soleimani.
All right.
So what do we expect next? And the Iranians are completely confused. They don't know what to expect from this guy. And so for the Iranians, the status quo is better than the unknown. And Ayatollah Khamenei is ruling out talks. He wants the status quo.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're right. But I think that's what the world is saying too. Like, I would imagine the Russians had her in a tailspin in this. And I would imagine many of the world leaders. I mean, the transatlantic relationship between the United States and Europe has been fundamentally broken. There is animosity between Europe and the US. Trump hates the European leaders and vice versa. It's equal exchange in that sense.
Yes.
The Russians are probably like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
You know, it's like you had the last presidency that said we're going to be fighting this war for as long as they take the new one. It's like, we're just going to end it. We're done. We're calling it a day. it is a sea change in the way the world functions. And I think people are still trying to settle into what does this mean? This has only been a month. It feels like it's been months, but it's only been one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I can imagine what if it's status quo, and if indeed we're going to this thing of like this kind of weird Cold War between the United States and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that looks like? I mean, do you really think that he'd take this risk of attacking Iran, knowing full well that you can't put troops on the ground? The only thing you can do is long-range attacks. And if they respond, this is not, you going after a small, tiny country. Iran is a sophisticated military capability.
That's an important point right there. Iran is an enormous country. It has a lot of people. It has a large standing army, and it has the friendship of Russia and China at the same time. Relations between Iran on the one side and Russia and China on the other have never been as close as they are now. And trade is robust. So this friend of mine who just got back from Iran sent me, more pictures and videos than I can count. I'm telling you, sanctions don't work. The Iranian economy is robust. They lack for nothing. They want for nothing. Cafes are open, into the night with people sitting and meeting with friends and family and listening to music. And you would never know that this country was under sanctions.
Yeah.
And so they're fine with the status quo. They don't need the United States. Pulling out of the JCPOA was a very big mistake for Donald Trump because the JCPOA was actually working. The tenets of the JCPOA were identical to the agreement that the United Nations had with Iraq, where the nuclear sites were sealed. They were sealed with a lead seal. All the nuclear sites were ringed with security cameras, and UN personnel watched the security cameras 24/7, and there were spot inspections. That actually worked. We're the ones who abrogated the JCPOA. We pulled out unilaterally. Well, when we pulled out unilaterally, we then told the British, the French, the Germans, the Japanese et al., okay, now you guys have to pull out of the JCPOA too. And they said, forget it. We came to the Iranians with an agreement. We're going to abide by the agreement. Well, US law says that any country that trades with Iran is subject to US sanctions. But we can't sanction the British, the French, the Germans, the Japanese. And so we just pretend that law doesn't exist. So Iran is doing business with all the other countries of the world except us. Well, they don't need us because their economy is actually working right now. We're the ones that are suffering, not the Iranians.
That is fascinating. I want to move to something else that's taking place. Right now, you have the Saudis in Jeddah that is accepting the delegation for Ukraine and the United States.
Yes.
I am fascinated by this because it is completely incomprehensible to why this is happening. And what I mean by this is images. Basically, these guys in Saudi Arabia, the United States has its delegation, Ukraine has its delegation. All right. The reason this is so fascinating to me is because these are our proxies. We talk to our proxies all the time. And not just talk to our proxies all the time. Anytime Zelensky wants to come to the US, he does. Anytime we want to send messages, we do. Anytime we want to send intelligence and all that stuff, we do. Why do we need a delegation in Jeddah to talk to people who are supposedly our allies? And we talk to anyway. And just for the audience, just so they understand what I mean by this, there were no diplomatic channels with the Russians, at the very least no open diplomatic back channel, yes, but we broke diplomatic relations with the Russians for the most part in its entirety. So it makes sense. Right, for the most part. So it makes sense for us to say, okay, we're going to have a delegation, we're going to talk, we're going to create the contours of this relationship going forward so there could be a meeting later. Now, there's supposed to be a meeting between Witkoff and Putin coming up on March 12th or 13th. I believe the 13th. This is according to Axios. This has not been confirmed by the White House. But let's assume for the moment it's legit. Why do we need to meet people who we meet and talk to constantly? If that makes sense. Like, again, with the Russians, we weren't really having conversations with them. So it makes sense for us to have these meetings in preparation for large meetings between Trump and Putin later. We talk to Zelensky all the time. Why
Yeah.
do we need to do this? Give me your take on this. And what does this mean that Ukraine has been relegated to having formal talks with the US on issues of peace talks? That's fascinating to me.
See, I don't think this is about Ukraine. I think this is about us and the Russians. We really don't have direct contact with the Russians anymore. The Russian ambassador to the United States left the U.S. in October and hasn't.
Well, they got a new one, from my understanding.
Yeah, but he hasn't presented credentials to the president yet, so
Ah,
he's not formally recognized as the ambassador yet. And I think there are bigger things afoot. Look, Trump is prepared to screw Zelensky, and
big time.
yeah, and so I don't think he cares one way or the other what Zelensky says or does in Jeddah or Riyadh. I think this is bigger. I think this is preparing for a summit between Trump and Putin. Something where Trump is likely going to propose some sort of grand deal, some big agreement that's going to try to get U.S.-Russian relations back on track. You know, what's interesting to me, though, is that the Saudis are involved at all. This is not a traditional Saudi role. This is very specific to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Usually, if we want a mediator like this, it's usually the Qataris, for example. The Qataris are sort of seen as non-aligned enough that they can be the honest broker. Ignore the fact that we have the largest Air Force base in the world in Qatar.
Right.
Foreign policy wise, they're non-aligned enough that we can trust them to bring 2 or 3 sides together for talks. I'm just amazed that the Saudis are doing this, and I think that this isn't necessarily. I'm gonna really split hairs here. This isn't necessarily a change in Saudi foreign policy so much as it's a function of the personality of Mohammed bin Salman.
But Saudis have a relationship with the United States and they have a relationship with Russia. I mean, they're part of BRICS, or at the very least adjacent to BRICS.
Yeah.
They have been taking Russian oil hand over fist
Oh,
and
yeah.
have been working with the US. So, I mean, wouldn't they be a perfect mediator in this situation, considering they have a relationship with
foreign policy wise, they like to stay out of these kinds of big conflicts.
I see.
They almost never put themselves in the center of conflicts. They like to just sort of, stay quiet and hope everything works out. That's why I think this is a function of his personality, Mohammed bin Salman. He wants to be involved in this because he wants to be the international statesman. This is new for Saudi foreign policy, which then leads me to believe that it's actually a bigger deal than people realize. It's not about Zelensky. It's about something bigger than that.
Dig into it. What is it? Because I get the sense that Trump, I mean, any deal that they make is going to be a new security architecture of Europe, which is weird because Europe is not, they're being sidelined in the conversation. It's like we will impose a new security architecture on you since you guys don't have the capability or the hard power to do anything about the fact that we're doing so. But so you think that this is effectively, all right, Zelensky, because in reading it, they made the point of saying this is going to be a determination of whether or not Ukraine really is open for a peace deal and a ceasefire. Full stop. Which gets across, A, there's going to be a mineral deal that Zelensky is probably going to sign. B, they're not going to get security guarantees for that mineral deal. C, even if they sign that deal, the reporting that has just come out, and this is coming out of Kiev press, but they're pulling it from a U.S. outlet, that Trump won't resume military aid after signing the mineral deal either way. Wow. So basically, when you sign this deal, there is no turning back on the weapons. We are going to end this war. And giving you weapons is not a way for us to end this war. So there's that. Meaning, I get the sense that part of this meeting is going to be dictating on some level how things are going to move forward and whether or not Ukraine is going to be willing to sign on to whatever Trump is pushing and moving forward. And one last point. There's also reporting that Trump wants to give it to Zelensky, that he wants him to either step down or have elections immediately and step down because, again, as you pointed out, he hates Zelensky. There's that. And I get the sense that this is Joe Biden's war. He wants this over with. And Zelensky is an impediment to him getting this over with. Give me your take on that.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. And again, you've got that Nobel Peace Prize hanging over top of everything. How great would it be to end this war that's been going on for years now, and to steal Ukraine's minerals at the same time? I say steal in air quotes, steal. As it is with many world leaders, this is personal with Trump. He does hate Zelensky. He wants Zelensky out. Trump knows that the Ukrainian constitution calls for a suspension of elections during wartime. He doesn't care. He wants elections because he wants Zelensky out. And if there aren't going to be elections, then he wants Zelensky to resign. Yeah, I think I said it on your show the last time I was on. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, Zelensky is living in London, not in Kyiv.
Wow.
I think that for Trump, what is acceptable is, well, multifold. Ukraine concedes the Donbass and Crimea to the Russians. There's going to have to be a carving of territory, number one. Number two, some sort of security guarantee, but not NATO membership for Ukraine. Number three, he would probably concede to Trump, that is, would probably concede to Ukrainian membership in the European Union, even if it's not really his call. I think that Ukraine's going to end up in the European Union. And the United States gets 50% of Ukraine's rare earth metals. I think that's where this is going. Whether the agreement is struck in Riyadh or whether it's struck in Geneva or whatever, I think that's where we're headed.
What do you think they're going to want from Putin on this? I am super fascinated by that question because the fact of the matter is Russia has won the war. And if the war continues, the Ukrainian military will collapse.
Yeah.
They just collapsed in Kursk. I mean, it was a rout in Kursk. Yeah. That pocket is going to be closed within a couple of weeks, which is going to be a massive psychological blow to many of these generals who went on CNN saying this was fantastic. This was just a great show by Zelensky. And I remember the day it happened, I said, this is humiliating for Russia, but all of those people are going to die. All of those people are going to be pushed out. There will be no negotiations over that territory in Kursk. I was right. Those people on CNN were completely wrong. Yeah. And I guess my thing is, from their point of view, if we keep going, they will collapse. So we have no need really to negotiate. However, we will negotiate if we get what we want in the context of that negotiation. So in a context like that, how do you push them on anything? How do you try to compel or force Putin's hand in a war that he knows he's already won?
I don't think you can. I agree with you. He's won. It's over. I think that you don't force him to concede anything. You can't force him to concede anything. He doesn't have to give up anything. So I think what you do is you end things where they are now and say, okay, keep what you took, and we're going to move on from there. The map of Ukraine is going to be redrawn, whether the Ukrainians like it or not. It's just a reality of the situation on the ground. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Putin has to concede anything. And I'll add too that in the last week, Trump ordered the Treasury Department to not enforce sanctions on Russian banks. The sanctions still exist, but they're not being enforced for the past week. Also, last week, very quietly, Visa and MasterCard started doing business in Russia again. So they see the writing on the wall.
I didn't think Russia was on the SWIFT system. How could they be doing business with Russia?
They were on the SWIFT system. And now they are, well, they're technically able to take credit card charges if those sanctions are being ignored or frozen or whatever word you want to use. So this isn't going to amount to any real change, but symbolically, it's huge. Symbolically, it signals the end of the conflict as far as the United States is concerned. I'm on a listserv of a whole bunch of people who Americans who used to work for RT.
Oh, Ben Swan, that list that he put out.
Yeah. And people are very excited watching these developments. They don't mean anything concretely yet, but symbolically, I think this is the beginning of the end of the conflict.
Well, Swan is saying 2 weeks.
I think that's optimistic.
Yeah, I don't know where he's getting that from.
No,
I have no idea where he's getting that from.
I don't think that's right. It's going to take more than 2 weeks, but it's coming.
Interesting. John, man, you have no idea how much I appreciate these conversations.
Oh, always good to talk to you, tomorrow.
John Kiriakou, former CIA officer. And again, one more time, John, just so the people know where they can find you and where they can find your speeches that are taking place.
Oh, thank you. You can find everything I do on Substack. It's johnkiriakou.substack.com. And if you want to look at the schedule, it's dynamic. They're constantly adding dates. It's at tigerslanestudios.com.
John, man, you have a fantastic evening. Thank you for this once again.
Buddy. You too.
All right. Good breakdown by John of what is taking place in regards to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And again, as I point out, it's very odd. It's if you and I are allies, you and I are talking all the time. I'm giving you intelligence and giving you weapons on one level. And anytime you want to come to DC to talk, we can come to DC and talk. We can talk constantly because we are allies. There is no breakdown, disagreement. There's nothing in the context that breaks us in regards to the way we communicate. If you and I are not allies, if you and I are not talking, and there is no, let's say, open channel between the leaders of the various countries, yeah, maybe a back channel, but from the standpoint of us having conversations, doesn't exist. Off the table. Can't even do it politically if you wanted to do it politically. Okay, so it makes sense that at the moment that we're trying to resolve our issues, that there's some kind of summit in order for us to set the context of which our world leaders are going to talk and discuss. Fair enough. That process is logical. It makes sense. It's context of our disagreements, the need for this kind of larger conversation. It is weird for Ukraine to need to do this. It's very weird. And it gets across the change in relationship between the US and Ukraine now, as opposed to what it was, let's say, during the Biden administration, or even what it was when Zelensky came at that meeting and flipped out because he wanted to renegotiate a deal that was never going to be renegotiated. The fact that they're needing to meet in this formal setting where we have our delegation, Ukraine has this delegation, and we are going to have a conversation about moving forward. That is astonishing. That is a radical shift in the relationship between a country that we backed to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, that we gave weapons, intelligence, that we assisted in every particular way possible that we can assist them in their fight against Russia. Now, the Trump administration has sent clear indications that they want to end this war. And part of the way that they realize we have no control over Russia, full stop. We have control over Ukraine. That is the country where we have influence, because that is the country where we've dumped so much money and resources into. So if we need to put the screws to a country to stop it, we can't do it to Russia. They are proceeding at pace in the Kursk region to effectively close that pocket now that they have extracted the pound of flesh and material that they effectively wanted out of Ukraine. And they're continuously moving westward, ever moving westward. And Ukraine can do nothing to stop it. And not just do nothing to stop it. They have been throwing bodies into the meat grinder in order to just slow the Russians down. Here's a body. That body would take 5 seconds. That slows them down 5 seconds. We need another body. Oh, there's another body. Let's throw that body into the mix. And doing it over and over and over, slowing the Russian down by seconds per body, but body after body nonetheless. And now they're saying, what about our 18-year-olds? We have a few of those that we can throw in to slow the Russians down for a few more seconds. So let's just do that. Here's an 18-year-old blown up. Where's another one? That's what they've been doing. Yes, I'm being hyperbolic, but that hyperbolic thing is actually what they've been doing. You can put the screws to Ukraine. You're not going to get weapons. Our support is going to dwindle. Maybe you don't get this intelligence, even though they've still been getting the intelligence. We are going to slow down your war fighting capacity because we need you to stop fighting in the war. We have no control over the Russians. We have control over you. And we're sick of this war. We're calling it a day. Zelensky, you need to leave. You need to go to Paris. You need to go to London. You need to leave. You are an impediment to us ending this war. So we need to get rid of you. You need elections. You need something. You have no legitimacy. You need to go. This is the tenor that the Trump administration has effectively taken. That delegation that is going there in this formal way, you're not addressing Congress. You're not coming to the US as a conquering hero. You're coming as a beggar. And as a beggar that we're sick of and we're tired of. This international panhandler that has been able to get hundreds of billions of dollars to get 1 million people killed and wiped off the face of the earth. You got rid of the deals that were on the table, either the Istanbul agreements, either the Minsk agreements. And I understand that the US had a huge hand, or Europe had a huge hand in saying, you don't need to pay attention to those particular agreements. I get it. He was led down the primrose path in the way that Alexander Mercouris says it. After the coup government took over in 2014, we helped overthrow the government. Our hands are all over it, which on some level confers a responsibility for our hands to be involved in ending it. Now the catch is, what does it mean to end it? And the negotiations that are taking place right now, where Trump's team, Witkoff, Rubio, and Witkoff is an interesting person to say, because Witkoff is the guy that gets shit done. That's the guy that went to Israel and said, I don't give a fuck that it's the Sabbath. We're having this negotiation right now. And no, Israel didn't attend to the negotiation. I'm just making the point that Witkoff is somewhat of a bulldog and trying to get that stuff accomplished. Why are they there? And I suppose they're there for the Trump administration to effectively say, this is what we want. We want to have negotiations with Russia to end this. So we're telling you, this is what we want. Yes, we want you to sign the mineral deal. No, you're not going to get security guarantees. No, you're not going to get the weapons turned back on. But we want this. And the way the media is reporting it is this is the area where the Trump administration is going to make a decision on whether or not Ukraine is open to actually ending the war. Russia is not going to accept a ceasefire. Super clear, not accepting a ceasefire. What they know is at the moment that the ceasefire happens, Ukraine fills itself with weapons. They rearm, they pull in 18-year-olds, train, and all of this other stuff in order to re-up for another push. And even potentially where Europe decides, hey, maybe let's put in peacekeepers now that there's been a ceasefire, with the idea of having a nose under the camel's tent. They went with the Minsk agreements 1 and 2. The US, Europe paid no attention to those agreements. Hollande came out and said, we lied. Angela Merkel, we lied. A deal that was set in order to prevent or end a war was effectively used as a way to fill Ukraine with weapons with the pursuit of eventually starting a war. It was inevitable at the point where the coup happened in 2014 when we helped overthrow that government. It's something we wouldn't have tolerated, and yet we expected the Russians to tolerate all of this stuff happening on the border with the US and Europe saying, Ukraine is going to be part of NATO. Zelensky, at one point, said that behind the scenes, they told him, you're not going to be part of NATO. And yet, at every opportunity, will come out and say Ukraine will be part of NATO. It is inevitable Ukraine will be part of NATO. In fact, or de facto, they will be part of NATO, knowing full well this was a red line. Ukraine went along with this charade. And yet, here we are, all of these people dead, with liberals continuously wanting to keep going. And with, weirdly enough, the Trump administration, conversations right now, try to end it. It's weird. It's just very weird. Axios is reporting that Witkoff is going to apparently meet with Putin coming up. I believe they said on the 13th. Now, the White House, from my understanding, have not confirmed that this meeting is supposed to take place. John Kiriakou was pointing out that he believed that this meeting is larger, and I agree with him. I believe it is larger, and it is prepping for this kind of meeting between Trump and Putin that at some point is going to take place. But keep in mind, the Russians are not going to have a ceasefire while they're having negotiations. What they are going to do is continue to pursue their course on the battlefield because they are winning on the battlefield. And they believe that ultimately, if nothing comes of these negotiations, at some point the Ukrainian military will collapse. I strongly suspect Trump knows that the Ukrainian military at some point will collapse, which is the reason why he is pressing so hard to get this done sooner rather than later, because he would rather have a military on the battlefield as opposed to having a military that is no longer there, and the Russians have full and complete control of what takes place on the ground, potentially even going to the border of Poland. So there's a context to this meeting, and there's symbolism in the fact that Ukraine is now meeting with the U.S. in these kind of similar terms that the Russians met with the U.S. But again, as I point out, the Russians were not having really negotiations with the U.S. or, let's say, communication with them. Ukraine was. This is almost like a devaluation of the relationship between the United States and Ukraine, symbolically, with them sitting across in opposite tables to negotiate on what this looks like in the end of the war. It is fascinating. It is absolutely and completely fascinating. Let's go to chat. Shout out to Skeptical Dirk, Adrian Dittman, Eric Olander, Wuhan Institute of Virology. Oh, that is super funny. Jonathan Notamaker, I believe that's Night Table 4. I want to go to the chat. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Papa Onaya Shelley. Sanders is a fraud, such a disappointment. They were right about us, Bernie bros. I rejected Hillary and voted Trump 3 times. Good riddance, Democrats. Wow. Papa Onaya Shelley, I accept your outrage. I feel your outrage even. So fair enough. Trump would not get my vote. Like, just because one is bad doesn't mean the other is better. But I do understand this notion of it's one thing to not vote for somebody, is another thing to punish somebody by voting for someone else. I can't vote for Trump. I just can't. Aside from the fact that he's right now trying to destroy the state, put that to the side, meaning destroying Social Security, Medicare. So, for him to say, well, I'm not touching those things, it's just waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, well, this is kind of like enhanced interrogation, right? It's your language. It's what you use to talk about it. Waste, fraud, and abuse could also mean I'm destroying Social Security. And if you are firing all of these people and preventing the organization from functioning, then you're destroying that organization. You're making it in a way where you effectively want to ultimately privatize this entity, something that Republicans have wanted forever. They don't believe in these things. And so they're open to destroying these things. And just because Donald Trump is doing something good on the war doesn't mean what he's doing in regards to the state is good. It is not. I can't back that. Also, the overthrowing of the US government is deeply problematic for me. If there's a huge amount of power that you invest in a political leader, and if I'm investing that power in a political leader, part of that also comes with this notion of trust. Not trusting the leader in general, but trusting that when you lose, you leave. Full stop. There's too much power invested in you to go rogue and make the decision, well, I don't want to leave. I just want to stay. I understand that I lost. I'm not even going to accept the fact that I lost. I just want to stay. That is deeply problematic. You will never get my support the moment that you do that even once. Trump did that once. He's an untrustworthy actor on this front. And so while I obviously applaud the fact that he's trying to end the war, he is deeply problematic as a political figure for me in order to get my support. I don't have a dog in the hunt. I'm sitting on the moon looking at events. I don't like either. I don't think either is working in our interests. So I guess my point is, I get your rage. I accept your rage. I understand your rage. Trump can't get my vote. It's just that. Papa Onaya Shelley, thank you. Deeply appreciate you. Janice Anderson, Nader is blamed for Gore's loss, even though the number of registered Democrats voted for Bush, then Nader votes combined. It's that. But see, that's not the way they talked about it, Janice. They talked about it as it was Ralph Nader's fault. Nader, despite the fact that Al Gore couldn't even win his own state. And yet they blame Nader. They didn't blame the Democrats that voted for Bush. They didn't blame the fact that Gore couldn't win his own state. They immediately deflected blame to Ralph Nader. When Sanders was having a conversation with Chris Hedges very clearly pointed out Sanders said he didn't want to be Ralph Nader. So he didn't run that race with full vigor that you would expect somebody to run that race when they're saying, we want a political revolution. In their mind, Bernie didn't want to be blamed for Trump winning. And Trump won anyway, which is the point that I was making to Dr. Leon. It's like you're taking this timid attack and approach to dealing with Joe Biden, of all people, and Hillary Clinton under this idea that I don't want to create a situation to which Donald Trump wins. And Donald Trump won anyway. He won anyway. So what does it mean that you don't want to take this aggressive approach when what you did, Trump still won? Janice, look, you 1,000% right. 1,000% right. So bikes a lot. It's a cycle of democracy. Dictators, military juntas, the United States went through a cycle twice. We're entering the dictator phase of the cycle now. Trump is a dangerous political figure. That danger comes from the fact that he is fundamentally dishonest in the way that he operates and the things that he says, meaning he's amoral to the truth. If it's on something that you approve of, okay, great, right? Because ultimately, he doesn't ultimately care. He just pursues a particular course, regardless of the criticism that's being leveled at him. On some level, that's a positive trait. On some level, that's a negative trait. If we're talking about Sanders, we would want Sanders to have that faculty of coming into office and going through the political revolution saying, I got elected for this. So yes, I'm going to do this. I don't care about your criticism. I am doing this. This is what I am effectively doing. I got elected for it. I'm the avatar of the American public. Damn it, I'm doing it. On some level, if you're doing God's work, that's a great thing. If you're not doing God's work, that is a horrible thing. Trump is that guy. And so, will he destroy Social Security? Will the criticism matter? I got to be honest on that. If he does that, that is going to destroy his presidency. Full stop. But I guess my point is, he is the guy. Look, in order to end the war, you need to be that guy. It's true. You just need to be that guy. You have a heavy dose of propaganda that has been leveled on the American public for like a decade. And if you go back to the Soviet Union, even longer, they went with, we're going to fight for as long as it takes. Zelensky is Winston Churchill, like all of this nonsense that needs to be unraveled. And so you're going to get hit by the press. Are you serious right now? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what the hell they're doing. I don't even think there's grass. I don't know why they're doing that. Long story short, it is, I don't know if this is the dictatorship phase. I know Daniel Lazare thinks in those terms. I don't know if this is just a president that is uber powerful with no opposition to the president. Here's a clip I want to show. So Van Jones, right here. Van Jones was on CNN. Part of the issue is there's no political opposition. The Democratic Party is broken. They threw everything that they could at Donald Trump. None of it was substantive. All of it was based on this idea of just being reactive and reflexive. You put a bullet in the guy, you try to put the guy in jail, none of that stuff works. And you lose. And you look at this and think, okay, now what do we do? It wasn't like we were taking a value-based approach to Donald Trump. We were going after him purely in this reflexive, reactive, we are the opposite of everything he is because he is Satan. And so we are virtuous in the way that we're doing it. And you lose. What do you do after that? That's where they are. Everything that they've done has failed. But everything that they've done has nothing to do with substance, nothing to do with real values. It's purely reactive. They have no idea what to do. And so people like me who say, why don't you, try to represent something? Why don't you have some level of substance? Why don't you go back to, New Deal politics where you were able to get the working class and be representative of that working class? That's what we say. That's not what they say. And what's wild about it, if Donald Trump goes too far in firing workers, destroying governmental devices, the Democrats will be able to step into that and say, hey, look at what the guy's doing without any changes to themselves at all. It will be like the abortion thing, where the moment that they go after abortion, you get all of these people who now are fighting for abortion, which gives the Democrats something to actually fight on and talk about without necessarily having any real substance for themselves. I suspect that if Trump goes too far, this is the ghost of Christmas future for Trump and his presidency. If they go through with this and the way that it seemed like they're going through with this. This is Van Jones. To be fair, I have not listened to this clip. I just read the top of the clip. But if it's what it says it is, Jones is right. Jones has a pulse on the Democratic Party. He is a Democrat. Every so often, he says the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. And then just lastly, Van, in terms of Democrats and where they go from here, this last week we did see them some people try to protest during the president's address, and then House leadership getting on to them, other Democrats calling them out. They still seem to be wandering around trying to figure this out. What's your take?
Can we ask another question? Do I be talking about my own party? Can we talk about Ukraine or something? No. Look, man, we're screwed. I mean, we don't know. No, Democrats don't know what to do. This is a nightmare. Somebody like Donald Trump, we thought we'd at least have Hakeem Jeffries in the speaker's chair to hold him back if we didn't have Kamala in there to do the right thing. Listen, the Democratic Party is going through a massive set of internal crises. You have a party that got trapped two ways. One, defending a broken status quo that nobody likes because they thought that Donald Trump was going to make it worse. But when you're defending the status quo, you're going to lose. And then offending most people in the country, calling everybody sexist and racist and transphobic and every other name, and then saying, please follow us. That's not a good strategy, folks. Defending a broken status quo and offending most of the country turns out is not as popular as my party thought it was going to be. And so it's going to take a while for people to get it figured out. I don't like talking about this. I'd rather be beat up. Can you give me something I can beat up Shermichael about? I don't want to talk about.
Yes. Yeah, I actually agree with that. You're defending a broken status quo. And on top of defending a broken status quo, you're alienating yourself from the rest of the American public. Yes. Yes. But again, built into that is, what do you represent? Like, look, if you are saying something is wrong with the status quo, then what are you doing to say we are something different? We find and we agree with you that something is fundamentally wrong with the way things operate. So we are XYZ, meaning, do you remember when they kept asking Democrats, what do you represent? What do you stand for? This was years ago. This was when Donna Brazile was head of the DNC. And they said, what do you represent? And they never had an answer for the question. And that was like a decade ago, where they couldn't answer the very basics of what are you? What do you stand for? What do you want? What do you, like, where's your Project 2025 for the Democratic Party, where people can judge you by what you say you are and what you say you want to do? Doesn't exist. I have no idea what they stand for in the real terms. And I guess that's kind of the issue. Yes, you were defending a broken status quo, but you had or the public had no idea what you actually stood for, and they still don't. If you had something that you stood for, at the very least, you would have a base of operations in order to contest Trump. Right now, they're all over the place. As Van Jones pointed out, they're in shambles. That is a true statement by Jones. So I guess my point is, for the dictator thing, you have no political opposition. You have a Republican Party that's beat in the form. So you have an uber powerful president that has decided he wants to reshape the global order, and for that matter, reshape the things that work in regards to the country. So, is it a dictatorship? Are you going towards a dictatorship, or is that just the president at the peak, the zenith of his power, with no political opposition in order to stop him or be a hedge? I have no idea which one it is. I'm very skeptical of the dictatorship thing. I'll be honest with you. The whole Trump is Hitler, Trump is a fascist, Trump is this, Trump is that. All of that stuff was effectively litigated during the campaign. All of that stuff effectively failed. And again, you have to ask yourself, how does a man like Trump get elected? And can he get elected against actual legitimate opposition? I don't know. I'm skeptical of the dictatorship thing. That's all. Chima Madu. How would Syria look after all the religious minority groups are tragically snuffed out without consequence? That is a sad post. That is a very sad post. I think the sadness of it is, you're right. Even if the United States and Russia call a UN Security Council resolution, what is that resolution going to say? I mean, for God's sake, they've just removed the bounty on Al-Jilani's head. The guy is a literal head chopper, and they just removed the bounty off the guy's head a few weeks ago. What are they going to do? Are you going to re-add sanctions to Syria? And if so, is that really going to change the context of what's taking place on the ground? Many of us, myself included, was pointed out that they are going to murder the minorities in that country, and they are murdering the minorities in that country. I've watched video after video after video of the killings, beating up kids, all of these things. And we pushed, cajoled, supported for decades what is taking place right now. Whether or not it's Turkey that is the main driver of this, that may be true. I'm pointing out that the weakness of the Syrian government was a direct result of us working in a clandestine way to undercut and destroy Bashar al-Assad's government. It's not, for all of these people who would say, oh, you guys just like Assad. I don't know anybody that was rah-rahing Assad. What they were concerned about was Iraq, and they were concerned about Libya, because from our point of view, you're doing this again, and you're most likely going to get the same results that you got in Libya, and for that matter, Iraq, where all of these jihadists coming out of the caves and the jungles and the swamps in order to kill, take, and to create this caliphate that they effectively wanted. Weirdly enough, this Muslim caliphate seems to continuously kill Muslims, strangely enough, and in no way ever attack Israel, who is occupying Syrian territory. It's astonishing. And yet, this is the way that it effectively functions in practice. And nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. They just allow it to happen. They just watch it. We can watch it on their videos. One atrocity after the next that these monsters, these animals, film. One thug after the next deciding that he's at Disney World while he's murdering a child and wants to take a picture of the fact that he's murdering some child. It's mind-blowing. And yet, we see it on our social media day after day after day. Christians, Alawites, Druze, etc. All slaughtered. I don't know. China, Chima, Madu, I have no idea. I have no idea. I would tell you, I have sat here and watched Israel murder and slaughter Palestinians, Lebanese, for the last year and a half. And you can watch it on video day after day after day. Even up to now, you can watch those clips. It is heartbreaking. And there's this sense of, how can nobody care? Like, I can't wrap my head around that. I felt the way about the Ukraine war, by the way. How does this happen and nobody care? And I think for the longest time, I had this mindset that, well, there's no way a genocide like this can happen again. There's no way. Nobody would just stand aside and allow all of these people to be slaughtered with everybody in the world watching the people being slaughtered. And then it happened. And we did watch it. And we had a Democratic president that backed it to the hilt and was giving defense of Israel as they were committing the genocide, even though he would add, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I think this is problematic. I wish Israel would just not make me look so bad when they're, humiliating me and emasculating me day after day with comment after comment. The fact that these monsters in Syria, that we are now calling the government of Syria, is going door to door and murdering women and children and men and old people and dogs and hamsters as they go about place after place after place in this kind of revenge killing for coastal communities that rose up in defense of their communities is outrageous and yet infinitely foreseeable in a way that we called when they first allowed the government to collapse. Chima, I don't know. Like I said, it's a grim post, astute, grim nonetheless. All right. We have come to the end of another show. 111 show. Yeah, the 111 show. I'm going to end this. Car care. Wow, you're still on. I finished farm work for today. Congratulations. Car care. I am closing, especially with the thing in the back that is screaming in my ear. Paid for you, skeptical jerk. Charles G. Agree. U.S. should stay in its hemisphere. Yes, I do agree with that. It depends on what that means. If that means us stealing Greenland, less so. But yeah, agreed. Let Europe deal with Europe. Now, one caveat to that. Europe continues to start world wars. The U.S. is the backstop to preventing them from doing that. At the very least, now we are. They are working tirelessly to start a third world war where Trump is like, I don't want to be involved in that third world war. If you want to fight the Russians on your own, God bless you. I don't want to be involved. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Joe Biden didn't seem to be that bright and was willing to go to the line. And if you go to the line, you can easily step across the line because just because you perceive it as a line doesn't mean the other person doesn't see it as you crossing that line. I'm going to end this. We've gone long. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you. Hit the like button for the remainder of the people that are here. If you dig this content, please share it. You can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, memberships. All of those things are helpful to keep the show operational. Also, as people say, buy me a cup of coffee. And I will see you guys. Yeah, tomorrow morning. Have a phenomenal day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, signing off.